Chapter 757. Dream encounter. Someone has infiltrated the compound? Klein didn't immediately sit up. All he did was turn his body to the side and reached his left palm under his pillow. He secretly held death now, and at the same time, he slowly spread his left hand open, preparing to activate creeping hunger. After knowing that it was difficult to find food for creeping hunger in Backland, he had infiltrated the prisons in Desi Bay's Conant City, found an inmate on death row, and confirmed that there wasn't any mistake in the judgment before feeding him to the glove. The Rose school of thought has locked onto me? No, it's impossible for them to be that quick. Besides, if it's them, they wouldn't just come but would wait for an opportunity. They will seize the opportunity when I'm passing by a secluded spot and strike so as to not alarm Backland's official organizations. I donated too much money at the moon mass, causing criminals to target me? A generous tycoon who just came to Backland from a foreign land is indeed an easy target. Of course, I can't rule out the routine investigations of the Nighthawks. As thoughts flashed through his mind, Klein heard a soft noise coming from the balcony in the adjoining half-open room. Right on the heels of that, there was the sound of a lock turning as the floor-to-ceiling window was pulled open nearly silently. Klein carefully listened and sensed the footsteps pass through the half-open room and into the corridor. After a pause, the footsteps walked towards the master bedroom before passing it, turning the doorknob to his valet's room. He went into the wrong room? Or could it be that he's here to find Richardson? Klein's heart stirred as he released his grip on death knell. He then reached out to the iron cigar case, which wasn't too far. After he removed the wall of spirituality, an illusory figure in a dark red coat and old triangular hat appeared beside him. It then walked into the full-body mirror. When Senor, the Wraith marionette, jumped to the glass window in Richardson's room, he saw a figure with orange-yellow skin, raven-black hair, and soft facial features walk out of the room. As for Richardson, he was silently sitting by the edge of his bed, his body leaning forward. His back was hunched up like he was fused into the darkness. Horror colored his face as he showed a weak and stumped expression. Finally, he fell silent. The person is indeed here for Richardson. His traits resemble that of someone from the southern continent. He's agile and skilled. He's likely not an ordinary person. This is a friend that Richardson got to know at the manor in the southern continent, or could it be a maternal relative? Richardson is only a valet with an annual salary of £35. What matter would need his help? Klein guessed as he used Senor's vision to observe. At that moment, he suddenly realized why Richardson was good at observation and often stayed in the balcony to size up any pedestrians. He was afraid of being found. I hope it's not too big a problem and won't affect my plans. I'll later divine the matter. If Richardson is unable to resolve the problem, I'll have to find an excuse to terminate his services. Seeing his valet lie back down, Klein pulled back his Wraith marionette. Meanwhile, Leonard Mitchell, who lived at 7 Pinster Street, once again entered the fog-immersed Backland. He had previously questioned the Daily Observer reporter, Mike Joseph, and received the news that Sherlock Moriarty didn't proactively involve himself in Lenevis's matter. Instead, he participated in a discussion after being hired. This made any suspicions regarding him drop drastically. If it wasn't because this detective had been slightly involved in Capham's matter, and how he had a close relationship with Emlyn White from the Harvest Church, Leonard Mitchell would have had thoughts of giving up the investigation to continue his search for Insanguil. As Sherlock Moriarty didn't have many friends at the Quelag Club, with one of them dying in the matter involving Prince Edisac while the other was reporter Mike Joseph, therefore, Leonard only had one target left, Dr. Aaron Series. From the dossiers, this doctor was once involved in a Beyonder matter of the Monster Pathway. After the item was swapped, he stopped being unlucky or having nightmares. His life returned back on track. Most people that Sherlock Moriarty know are involved in Beyonder matters. This detective sure isn't an ordinary someone. As Leonard thought, he rang the doorbell in Aaron Series' dream. Upon entering the dream, he casually found a sofa to sit in and said to Dr. Aaron, who was opposite him, "Tell me in detail how you got to know Sherlock Moriarty." In the dream, Aaron didn't lie. He started from how Mrs. Mary had introduced Sherlock Moriarty into the Quelag Club, and how he was one of the recommenders. He continued until the detective suggested that he inform the Church of the Evernight Goddess's bishop about his abnormal matters. The truth is described in the dossiers. Sherlock Moriarty seems rather friendly towards the official Beyonder organizations, and he was endorsed by Isengard Stanton. Leonard glanced at the mustached Sherlock which Dr. Aaron conjured and retracted his gaze as he listened attentively. After Aaron finished recounting everything in detail, he said, "He headed to the south for a vacation, and he hasn't returned. I've been worried about him all this while. However, he's a detective filled with wisdom and a kind heart. I believe nothing bad will happen to him. I just wish that he can participate in the celebration of my child's birth." Perhaps Leonard suspected that Sherlock Moriarty might never return to Backland. He then politely bade farewell and walked out of Dr. Aaron's dream. After taking a few steps forward, he subconsciously looked back and saw that inside the house with a garden, blurry spherical lights that represented different dreams filled the entire space. Everything was fine. Was it a mistake on my part? I keep feeling as though something about me is changing. Leonard muttered as he turned to fly to Pinster Street. Everywhere he could see was covered in dense fog. The street lamps were gloomy and pale. Suddenly, Leonard stopped flying as he cast his gaze at a building. In that house, there were about 5 spherical lights floating in silence, making it look different from the other buildings. However, Leonard's spiritual perception told him that there was apparently a black blob in the house which could absorb all light. Furthermore, he discovered that he didn't recognize the street he was at. He felt alarmed, suspecting if he had seen something he shouldn't see. He hurriedly retracted his gaze as he prepared to leave and head for his residence. At that moment, the building that looked ordinary sounded with a teasing voice. "Why don't you come in for a cup of tea?" Thoughts erupted in Leonard's mind as he flew up at high speeds without even thinking. In his spiritual perception, the terrace houses lining the back, the garden, and tiny buildings were burgeoning in size as the windows and doors turned into mouths that were biting at him. The nearby black street lamps were extending in height, making the surroundings appear like a forest of steel that seemed to stop Leonard. Leonard didn't stop or turn back. He felt a chill down his back as it became more obvious and deeper. His body slowly stiffened as though he was being grabbed by countless invisible hands. Just as he felt that he couldn't hold out any longer, he saw a familiar house where a familiar window and light stood. He held his breath, plunged down abruptly, and fell back into his dream. He jolted awake and found himself drenched in cold sweat. "Old man, what did I actually encounter?" Leonard retracted his legs from the desk's edge and asked with a sense of lingering fear. The slightly aged voice in his mind replied after a few seconds, "I'm not sure." Leonard's eyelid drooped immediately as he didn't pursue the matter. He then cast his gaze out the window and saw lights everywhere in the Backland night sky. It was tranquil. 160 Backland Street. Inside Dwayne Dantes' mansion. "Sir, Ma'am Wanna Heisen is here." Richardson entered the room and said to Klein. Klein put down his papers and looked up, glancing at his valet. He discovered that he was still an apprehensive man of few words, silent and reserved. There was nothing odd with him. If it wasn't because the divination outcome was okay, suddenly firing an employee will incur suspicion. Klein silently mumbled. He stood up as though nothing had happened, and he got Richardson to help him wear his coat. 15 minutes later, he was holding his etiquette teacher, Wanna Heisen, in an embrace as he began to learn another common dance used at social events. "I feel as though I'll be losing my job in a few days." After a while, Wanna praised Dwayne Dantes for his progress. When she was done, she added, "However, you're still a little restrained. Although you don't have to act like intis men who cling closely to the ladies, you don't have to constantly maintain a distance. It's very normal to make occasional contact. The way you are behaving now makes you appear rigid and dull." Klein pulled her in a little and replied with a smile, "I was afraid of being rude." Does this mean that being too close to ladies is an act of rudeness? It also implies I'm full of charm, and that he might embarrass himself if he's too close? This is quite a euphemistic form of praise. Wanna thought and said with a smile, "You have learned well." The dance continued as Klein looked at Wanna Heisen's face as he asked warmly in a casual manner, Ma'am, you seem frustrated? Wayana lowered her head and chuckled. It's nothing serious. My husband is a businessman, and he recently had some minor conflicts with some people. We can resolve the matter. Oh, your question was too direct. Before both parties have established a friendship, it's best not to ask about their matters, unless she has made it obvious. Compared to you who comes and goes in families of high society, thus, knowing many madams and ladies, as a tycoon who just arrived in Backlund, I do lack the necessary social connections. Klein nodded gently and said with a smile, I thought we were no longer strangers. He then skipped the topic and began talking about his own experiences and his neighbors. Wayana would mention a few things in response, allowing Klein to better grasp the traits and preferences of his neighbor. After Wayana left, Klein stood at the door for some time before turning to say to his butler, Walter, find out what trouble Ma'am Wayana is facing. If she can't resolve it, we will provide her with some timely assistance. Chapter 758. Efforts will ultimately pay off. In the evening, Klein, who had just returned from St. Samuel Cathedral, was just about to enter the dining hall on the second floor when he saw butler Walter walk over and say with a polite bow, Sir, the matter you wish to be investigated has been completed. Klein didn't inquire further in front of the other servants as he staidly nodded. Let's talk in the study. Walter followed behind him and came all the way to the third floor. Richardson then opened the door and lit the gas wall lamp inside. Klein unhurriedly walked to his desk, sat down, and looked at the butler for the report. As Walter gestured Richardson to guard outside the door, he approached the desk and deliberated over his words. After the door closed again, he said, Ma'am Wahana's husband is a cloth merchant. He had been cooperating with someone and had invested £1,000 into it, but the other party ran off with the goods. She has already sought the help of Member of Parliament Macht and Ma'am Rihanna to urge the police department to crack the case as quickly as possible. However, the police usually doesn't dare to guarantee that they can find the target for such cases. Klein picked up the black fountain pen on his desk and stroked it. To Ma'am Wahana's family, £1,000 isn't a small sum. Based on what he knew, an ordinary home tutor didn't earn more than £150 a year. If the employer provided boarding and lodging, the salary would be even lower. Although Wayana served high society and had many employers, her annual income capped out at about £400 to £500. Furthermore, a large amount of her expenses would be spent on her dressing, posture, and looks, to prevent her employers from finding her unfitting as an etiquette teacher. Yes, her husband's income as a cloth merchant can only be considered average. To him, a £1,000 investment is a rather huge investment, Walter said by mincing his words. It's a lot for me too. Klein sighed and smiled. I just came to Backlund, so I'm not very familiar with the police. Walter immediately replied, Sir, back when I was under the service of Viscount Conrad, I knew a few members of a Backlund High-Ranking Police Officer Association. Backlund High-Ranking Police Officer Association? That would be the most important members at Civilau's Yard. Even the chief superintendents who are in charge of an entire borough might not be qualified for induction. Civilau's Yard referred to the Backlund Police Department. It got its name from the street it was located at. As expected of a butler who served under a noble family. Klein sighed inwardly as he smiled with a shake of his head. There's no need to do so for the time being. On this aspect, I'm sure Ma'am Wayana is able to seek the help of many people. Be it Member of Parliament Macht or others, all of them have the ability to make Civilau's Yard place importance on the case. He paused and deliberately said in passing, I've seen the lower rungs of society, and I know their methods of survival. At times, the police might not be as useful as gang members or bounty hunters. Walter, go to the police department to retrieve the corresponding details and head over to the famous bars in the Backlund Bridge area and East Borough to commission a bounty mission. Regardless if they find the corresponding criminals or the batch of cloth, I'll be giving them £200 in return. Heh, let's hope that those cheats had chosen to remain in Backlund. A reward of £200? Walter repeated the sum as he couldn't help but steal a glance at his employer, as though he found it unbelievable that he would offer so much for Wahana's matter. He turned agape and was just about to say something but ultimately kept silent. All he did was seriously reply, "All right, sir. I'll give you this money directly." Klein slowly got up and took out his wallet. As Walter received the thick wad of cash, he asked in thought, "Should I tell Ma'am Juana?" Klein smiled. "There's no need." Enlightened, Walter nodded with a bow. "Your generosity will spread through this street." East Borough, Dharavi Street, in a cramped but lively pub. Zio, who had seriously combed her short, blonde hair before heading out, squeezed through the area filled with men that stank of alcohol and putrid sweat and arrived at the bar counter. She tapped the counter and asked the bartender, "Any new missions today?" If it were anyone else who asked without ordering any drinks, the bartender would have ignored them, but upon recognizing Zio, a bounty hunter who no one wanted drinking, he could only sigh and say, "A very handsome reward, 200 pounds. 200 pounds? Zio nearly suspected that she had heard wrong. Apart from Miss Audrey's missions, she had never seen such a handsome reward in East Borough or the Backlund Bridge area. Even the mission to seek out Azek Eggers that drove bounty hunters crazy had only offered 150 pounds. For an ordinary bounty hunter, completing a commission like this was enough for them to not work for a year. To Zio, it was equally important because she had been helping the mysterious man in the golden mask over the past few months. She had learned that the man was from MI9, and she was trying to earn enough contributions to exchange for the interrogator potion formula. Therefore, the reward she received when completing his tasks only paid a little. Most of it was exchanged towards her contribution goals, so all her savings came from the advantages that her sheriff sequence had given her to capture criminals. Once I receive the potion formula, I still have to spend money to buy the Beyonder ingredients, and I only have 300-odd pounds. Furs is right. Money isn't omnipotent, but it's sufficiently important. Upon having this thought, she looked at the bartender and asked cautiously, "What's the mission? Who commissioned it?" "Find a few cheats. They cheated the victim of cloth costing 1,000 pounds. As the bartender handed the details to Zio, he said, "The person who commissioned the mission looked like a butler. He called himself Walter, and he's in service of a Mr. Dwayne Dantes from Backlund Street. If you capture the cheats or find the cloth, you can head there to retrieve the bounty." Zio quickly flipped through the documents as something quickly formulated in her mind. She instinctively knew the direction in which to continue the investigations. "I'll take this mission," she said immediately with a nod. The bartender shrugged and said, "You aren't the only one. All the bounty hunters have taken on this mission. Besides, they have other ideas." "Like what?" Zio asked out of curiosity. The bartender chuckled. "They say that since Mr. Dwayne Dantes is so generous, they're willing to recommend themselves if he lacks a bodyguard. However, they later gave up on the idea since being a bodyguard isn't as free as being a bounty hunter. Even having drinks will have to wait until they're given time off. That's not a problem for me, but I can only be a bounty hunter." Zio nodded, jumped off the high stool in front of the bar counter, and didn't waste time heading for the door. The next day, just as Klein finished breakfast and was preparing to head to his garden to have a stroll to aid in his digestion, butler Walter came in from outside and silently followed behind him until there wasn't anyone around. "Sir, there are 2 matters that need your attention," he said politely. "2 matters?" Klein was somewhat surprised. He thought that there would only be one. Walter nodded. "Yes, the first matter involves the 10% shares in the Backlund Bike Company. Someone has already offered 10,000 pounds. Sir, do you still wish to continue in the bid? It has been raised to 10,000 pounds? Not bad at all." Klein deliberately acted stumped as he thought. "I'm new in Backlund, and there are many things that need me to hold back on. Let's leave it at that." "All right, sir." Walter then said, "The cheats who scammed Ma'am Wahana's husband of the cloth have been captured. The bounty hunter has already arrived and requested payment." "That quickly?" Klein turned his head in shock as he looked at his butler. If he had taken action himself, he was indeed capable of settling it that very day. After, he had dowsing rods seeking to find people, but the problem stemmed from the fact that most bounty hunters weren't seers. "Yes, perhaps it's a Beyonder good at tracking and searching for people?" Klein made a preliminary judgment. Walter answered in confirmation, "Yes, it's much faster than I imagined." According to that bounty hunter, she did a reverse search from black market sales before finding the cheats. The black market peddlers gave in so easily? From the looks of it, they must have been taught a lesson with the fist. Klein nodded and said, "What's that bounty hunter's name?" "She's quite capable. She calls herself Zio," Walter answered truthfully. "No way." Klein almost stumbled. Thankfully, he had the impressive balance of a clown. After calming the upheavals through his heart while acting calm, he deliberated and said, "Keep the bounty hunter's contact method. Perhaps there might be a chance to gain her assistance in the future." "All right, sir." Walter didn't find any problems with Dwayne Dantes' instructions. Any decent member of high society kept some unofficial means to their chests. Klein didn't continue on the topic of Zio as he tersely said, "How much was reclaimed?" The cash and the yet-to-be sold cloth from the cheats came up to about £850. Walter had apparently anticipated his employer's inquiry on the matter and had asked ahead of time. "Very good," Klein nodded and said. "After paying the bounty hunter, help her send the cheats and the goods to the nearby police station." Northborough Police Station. Wyanna and her husband, Bacchus, looked at the high-ranking inspector in front of them as they asked in unison, surprise coloring their voices. "It's been found." "They've been caught." The high-ranking police inspector smiled in response. "Yes." When he informed them how much cash and cloth was left, Wyanna and Bacchus heaved a collective sigh of relief. They could afford £150 in losses. Furthermore, the remaining cloth still had space for greater appreciation and profit. In essence, they hadn't suffered much of a loss. They repeatedly thanked the inspector until someone invited Bacchus to identify the goods and criminals. Wyanna sat there without losing her etiquette. She smiled at the high-ranking inspector and said, "Your efficiency has exceeded my expectations. I'm very curious as to how you found the bunch of cheats." Being aware that this beautiful and elegant lady knew a member of Parliament of the House of Commons, and that she would eventually learn the truth, the high-ranking inspector didn't hide it from her. In fact, it was completed by a bounty hunter. She investigated the black market of stolen goods and quickly caught the suspects. "You even offered a bounty?" Wyanna seemed to gain a full understanding of the whole story. The inspector shook his head and said, "No, someone beat us to it. He offered £200. £200? Wyanna asked in surprise. That wasn't a small sum of money, and it even exceeded the expected profit that her husband would earn from the sale. Seeing the inspector give an affirmative reply, Wyanna couldn't help but ask, "Who was it that offered the bounty?" The bounty hunter didn't say, but accompanying her was a gentleman dressed as a butler. The inspector simply described Walter's looks. Wyanna vaguely guessed at the butler's identity as she leaned back slightly, muttering softly to herself, £200. In the afternoon, Wyanna, who came to Member of Parliament Mock's house to teach his daughter etiquette, first thanked Ma'am Rihanna for extending their help. After the blackish-green-haired Rihanna said a few words of humility, she asked, "Wyanna, I heard that you're Mr. Dwayne Dantes' etiquette teacher. I wonder what kind of person he is?" Wyanna deliberated and said, "He's a true gentleman. He's warm-hearted, generous, kind, educated, gentlemanly, and very knowledgeable." Rihanna nodded slightly upon hearing that before turning to look at her proud daughter and chuckled. "Unfortunately, he's a little too old, or he might make a good match. Well, I plan on inviting him to our ball this weekend." Chapter 759. First dance Saturday night, 8 p.m. Klein rode his high-end carriage and arrived at 39 Buckland Street, Member of Parliament Mock's house. In 2.5 minutes after stealing a glance at the lit fountain that was sloshing with water, he buttoned his tailcoat and walked down the carriage before strolling to the house's main entrance. Richardson held an exquisitely packaged bottle of Southville red wine and followed closely behind his employer. After walking through the main door, Klein instantly saw Member of Parliament Mock and his wife, Rihanna, walk over to welcome him. The former was wearing an olive-green army officer uniform with an orange-red sash around his waist and a few medals hanging from his chest. In the Lone Kingdom, serving and retired officers enjoyed wearing their military uniforms at balls. The latter was wearing a yellow long dress with frilly sides and rarely seen, exquisite lace, making her look different from unmarried ladies. However, she also partially exposed her fair neck and her shoulders. Klein took the bottle of Southville red wine from Richardson's hand and handed it to Member of Parliament Mocked before saying with a bow, "Sorry, I'm late by a few minutes." This was actually a common situation at lone balls. Guests would rather be late by a certain amount of time than be early. This was because the masters of the house might still be busy with the final preparations with the ball. It was the worst time for them to entertain guests, but of course, one had to ensure that they weren't late by more than 10 minutes. If Wyanna hadn't specially taught him this, Klein would have definitely come early as a form of respect. "It's fine. The ball hasn't officially begun." Mocked glanced at the Southville red wine as he handed it to his valet before nodding with a smile. At Lone's high society engagements, one had to bring a gift for the master if it was their first time attending a ball. Alcoholic beverages were the most welcomed, but one had to keep in mind that the first gift had to be something locally produced. After greeting Mocked, Klein looked towards Ma'am Rihanna and saw that she had slightly raised her right hand. Hence, he took one step forward and lifted her palm and bent his back to kiss it. "You illuminate the entire ball." Before the ball began, complimenting the masters of the house was a necessary step in Lone's social events. And unlike Intis, Lone's hand-kissing etiquette required the lady to gesture that it was possible before a gentleman could do the kiss. Otherwise, it would be a serious faux pas. "Likewise for your arrival," Ma'am Rihanna replied with a smile. Then, the couple led Dwayne Dantes through the corridor and into the main hall where a pleasant tune was echoing. After taking a few steps forward, Maury Mocked pointed at a lady in a sky-blue dress. "My daughter, Hazel." Klein looked at the girl as his pupils suddenly constricted. He knew this girl. To be precise, he had seen her image before. Back when he had asked Rhodes where he could obtain a mystical item which could steal the beyonder powers of others, the magic mirror had indicated a scene of an arrogant lady loitering in the sewers, and she was none other than Hazel Mocked. She was a lady with wavy black-green hair and bright brown eyes. She has a mystical item that corresponds to a fire bandit? With her family conditions, why would she be loitering in the sewers? Is it some fortuitous encounter of hers? Was she searching for something or waiting for something in the sewers? She has already become a beyonder? How did she become one? Could it be that she has a grandpa parasitizing in her body? Klein, who was donning the skin of Dwayne Dantes, instantly thought of many questions, but he pressed his hand to his chest as he bowed with an unperturbed look. "Good evening, Miss Hazel." During this process, he stole a glance at Hazel Mock's face and discovered that she wore a composed look. There was an arrogance in her eyes, and all she did was smile politely and answer, "Good evening, Mr. Dantes." She didn't have any abnormal reaction, which means that she's unable to sense the aura of the gray fog. At the very least, there's no grandpa parasitizing her. I can't be certain for now, and I'll have to continue observing. Klein stood up straight as he took a cup of pale gold champagne from a waiter's tray. He then began chatting with Member of Parliament Maury Mocked. "I never expected you to be a major." He could tell from the epaulette on Mock's shoulder. If he was a colonel, Klein would have even suspected if the gentleman was also a beyonder, but it was hard to tell for a major. It's nothing. There are many opportunities to render meritorious services in Balam," Maury answered. "Of course, the weather there is especially unsuitable. I've always been suggesting to the Army's higher-ups to design a uniform for West Balam and to get rid of the traditional dark colors. Otherwise, the officers will only feel as if they are beef waiting to be roasted." As for the enlisted soldiers, most of them wore red tops and white bottoms. Yes, the weather there is completely different from what it's like in the country. Even Desi Bay isn't that hot. Klein indicated that he had been to the southern continent, and he had been to either East or West Balam to corroborate his hunting experiences that he had mentioned a few days ago. After a few minutes of small talk, Mocked apologized and walked to the staircase with his wife. At the second floor, he raised a cup of red wine while standing by the railings facing the main door and said, "Thank you everyone for coming to our ball. First, let us toast the deities. They are the source of everything beautiful." He and Ma'am Rihanna tapped 4 times on their chests as they softly praised the goddess. The other guests also praised the deities they believed in via their own means. Macht continued having his cup raised as he said with a smile, "Second, a toast to the kingdom. It is a stable bedrock. To the kingdom." Klein raised his cup of champagne and spoke with the other guests around him. Following that, Macht surveyed the area and asked humorously, "Finally, what shall we toast to?" Klein's mind whirred as he said loudly with a smile, "A toast to the improvement of the air in Backland." Macht was taken aback as he couldn't help but smile in response. "Excellent. That's a great suggestion. A toast to the improvement of Backland's air. This is a symbol of us living better lives. Cheers." The fixing of the atmospheric pollution issue had always been one of his political ideals as a House of Commons Member of Parliament. He had ultimately been pushing for the corresponding bills, and he had played a significant role in the improvement of the environment. Therefore, toasting to the improvement in Backland's air was equivalent to toasting to himself. It was more euphemistic and more aboveboard. All the guests echoed in a spirited burst as they finished the drinks in their hands. Right on the heels of that, Member of Parliament Macht held Ma'am Rihanna's hand, and they went down to the hall. They then started the opening dance in the mellow music. All the gentlemen present began finding their first partners to dance. Klein took another cup of champagne as he leisurely sized up the guests. "Ma'am Mary is here as well?" He swept his gaze and found someone familiar. As one of the major shareholders of the coin company, with a wealth amounting to tens of thousands, Ma'am Mary had formerly hired Sherlock Moriarty to investigate her ex-husband's act of adultery. She's a member of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council, so it's normal that she has a close relationship with the Member of Parliament. Klein didn't attempt to invite her to a dance, since he here as Dwayne Dantes. He didn't know this lady who lived in another street. He retracted his gaze and looked elsewhere. He saw Hazel Macht holding a cup of white wine and standing to the side. She wore a clear smile of alienation as she watched the gentlemen lock onto their targets to invite them for a dance. This lady actually looks pretty good. She's dignified and pretty. She should have been the star at this ball, with people yearning to invite her to a dance. However, the way she exudes that look of arrogance, looking down at people with a supercilious look, makes any gentleman who casts his eyes on her shift over to another target. I've seen this look in the eyes of certain beyonders as well. They no longer think of themselves as mortal, and they often have a sense of superiority when facing ordinary folks. Haha, this implies that Miss Hazel is likely a beyonder. That's right, if she isn't a beyonder, how would she dare to loiter in the sewers? She's from the Marauder pathway? But how is she to act as a marauder or swindler with such arrogance? It's hard to imagine. Seeing that the hosts were almost done with the opening dance, he began seriously considering who he could invite. Dwayne Dantes is in his early 40s, so it isn't appropriate to invite a lady for his first dance, unless it's someone confirmed to be a junior. And the first dance of most ma'ams would be done with their husbands. I should be able to invite people I'm familiar with or the hosts. Klein swept the dance floor and found the only lady Dwayne Dantes was familiar with. It was his etiquette teacher, Wyanna. Invite her? No, she likely already knows that I've secretly helped her. To invite her for the first dance can easily make her misunderstand. It might even affect her relationship with her husband and incur unnecessary trouble for Dwayne Dantes. It's not like I'm Emperor Roselle who has a penchant for the wives of others. No, he has a penchant for everything. In short, I should avoid creating gossip. Klein shifted his gaze and heard the music change. It went from a mellow melody to something brisk. It was a piece of countryside music that was popular in Central Lone. It was well liked by nobles and was often used for the first dance. With the change in music, the gentlemen walked to the ladies and madams they had selected. Klein also noticed that no one approached Hazel Macht. She's one of the hosts of this ball. Besides, I can observe her at a close distance. Heh, if she really is a beyonder of the Marauder pathway, it implies that the gray fog is able to converge beyonders from the neighboring pathways of the seer pathway. Klein wore a gentle smile as he unhurriedly walked to the arrogant lady. "Miss Hazel, may I have the pleasure of a dance with you?" Dwayne Dantes with his white sideburns gave a standard bow as he said. Hazel glanced at him and, after a few seconds of silence, said, "It will be my honor." She then extended her palm. Klein politely held her hand and entered the dance floor as they began a brisk and lively dance. Glancing at her beautiful but deadpan face, Klein said with a smile as he tried probing, "I just noticed that many young gentlemen wished to invite you to a dance, but they were unable to muster their courage." Hazel looked up and swept her gaze at him and said, "Mr. Dantes, that's not a polite topic." Klein choked, lost as to how to reply. Chapter 760. What a small circle. I thought she would contemptuously say that she doesn't like immature and incapable men, hinting that she isn't impressed with ordinary people. Who knew she can't even be bothered to answer this question? This sense of superiority will easily lead to a loss of control for subsequent advancements. Klein couldn't help but lampoon inwardly. From what he knew, Beyonders were only humans who had additional powers. It was equivalent to having plenty of money or status. In fact, they were still considered human and had no way of escaping human society. Only by reaching sequence 4 would one experience a qualitative change. Furthermore, most demigods continue being active in human society. Even the sequence 1 snake of fate will Osepton is being an obedient unborn fetus. Perhaps only at the level of blasphemer Amon and the others will they be able to view the real world as a god. Klein's mind whirred as he said, "I'm sorry. I was once a merchant who often spent time in the northern continent and southern continent, and I have had little experience with a ball. This type of ball." "It's fine," Hazel replied calmly as though she didn't care about the topic he had just raised. If it were anyone else, they would have been at a loss for a conversation with this arrogant lady. All they could do was focus on the dance, but Klein was considered quite a knowledgeable and experienced person at this point. He knew quite a bit of the different Beyonders in the mysterious world, so with his apology, he said with a smile, "This is a challenge that isn't simpler than the sea. It similarly has beautiful scenery but hides countless difficulties. Of course, the sea also has stories of all kinds of treasures. Some of them are clearly fake, but others sound rather realistic but are impossible to verify. It's just like Death's Key that's ranked first amongst them." Death's Key? Hazel looked up at Mr. Dwayne Dantes, who was a lot taller than her. Indeed, a Beyonder with a strong sense of superiority would often have their interest piqued when it's something that involves mystery. Klein chuckled inwardly and he nodded gently. Yes, it's rumored to be hidden somewhere in the Berserk Sea. He used the legends he had heard back when he was aboard the White Agate, as he added more of the details he had heard during his career as an adventurer. During this process, he couldn't avoid mentioning the 4 kings and the 7 pirate admirals. Hazel was clearly interested in these as she responded to Klein in a rare instance. She would even occasionally ask other questions, making the dance between them less awkward. Without realizing it, their dance came to an end. Klein skillfully ended the topic and switched to asking, "Do you plan on returning to where you were, or do you plan on heading over to get some food?" After a dance, the gentleman had to abide by the lady's wishes and send her to where she wished to go. It didn't have to be where she originally stood. Hazel opened her mouth as though she wished to ask further, but she ultimately didn't speak further. She nodded her head in a reserved manner, "Where I was." She clearly misses the stories at sea. She's just a big brat. As long as you grasp her temper and find what interests her, she's actually not difficult to interact with. Klein held back his smile as he sent Hazel back to the periphery of the dance floor where she previously stood. As for him, he acted casual as he walked to the long table that had all kinds of food placed on it. He picked up a plate and began to scoop a serving of pan-friend dragonbone fish, and he matched it with some sliced black pepper steak. Compared to the dance and entertaining others, food is the true essence of a gathering. As Klein thought, he worked hard at trying to make his appearance while eating appear elegant enough. At this moment, he saw Ma'am Mary walk over and fork a piece of foie gras soaked in red wine onto her plate. When Klein saw her glance at him, he politely smiled with a nod as a response. "How may I address you? I haven't met you before at the balls and banquets hosted by Member of Parliament Mocked." Perhaps it was because of Dwayne Dantes' gray sideburns and deep blue eyes that were very charming. The ordinary-looking Ma'am Mary with slightly high cheekbones took the initiative to ask. Klein laughed and replied, "I'm a merchant who just returned from Desi Bay, Dwayne Dantes. I live on this street. Ma'am, do I have the honor of knowing your name?" Mary nodded in thought, and she roughly understood this man to be a merchant who was trying hard to enter high society, just like she was previously. She said with a smile, "Mary Schott, Coin Company's executive director." She didn't mention that she was the biggest shareholder of the Coin Company, or mention that she was a member of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council. This was a loan-styled euphemism. Mary Schott. She has taken up her original last name? Right, she has already divorced. Klein silently thought to himself and said with a smile, "I know of this company. Its main business is in anthracite and high-quality coal. It has expanded rapidly in the past few months. To be frank, I have the intention of investing in it, but I don't seem capable of competing with the rest." After the atmospheric bills were passed, there was a drastic increase in the demand of anthracite and high-quality coal. Coin Company managed to develop itself in ways that exceeded its past efforts. Its overall valuation had already exceeded £250,000. Klein wasn't shooting his mouth when talking about investing, but that he believed that this industry would become even more important in the coming years until humanity found a resource to replace it. Mary had always been very proud of the National Atmospheric Pollution Report she pushed for, as well as the development of the Coin Company, so she couldn't help but smile when she heard that. This is because people are beginning to pay attention to the environment that they are living in. Having said that, she gently sighed and said, "As it gets better, trouble also increases as a result." Having just acquainted himself, Klein didn't ask about the trouble. With his prior acquaintance with Ma'am Mary, he easily found a topic of interest and had a good conversation with her. Her attitude towards Sherlock Moriarty and Dwayne Dantes is very different. Despite being someone she knows, just a change in looks and identity will be given a brand new form of treatment without any problems arising. This feeling is truly magical. As they chatted, Klein felt wistful as he felt that the additional faceless potion he had consumed was quickly digesting. After a few minutes, a handsome man with bright blonde hair walked over with a cup of red wine. He smiled at Ma'am Mary and said, "Mary, what are you talking about?" "Hibbert, this is Mr. Dwayne Dantes from Desi. His experiences at sea and West Balham are truly interesting." Mary immediately introduced the two. "Dwayne, this is Mr. Hibbert Hall, the eldest son of the Earl of Eastchester. We should be calling him Lord, but he prefers people to address him as Mr. Chief Secretary. He's the Chief Secretary of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council. I've heard you mention him before. Of course, that was when the identity Sherlock Moriarty was still active. The Earl of Eastchester is a major noble in the nation. He's considered the top brass when it comes to high society." Klein politely bowed without appearing overly low. "Please permit me to convey my thanks as an ordinary citizen. The work of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council has allowed us to live in better living environments." Hibbert Hall was rather pleased with such sincere gratitude, so he smiled in reply. "This is all thanks to the hard work all of us have put in." "By the side," Mary said with a smile, "Dwayne, don't mention such matters again. You will make Hibbert arrogant." "No, I was just joking. He's more humble than all the noble children I know. He should be having a vacation in the Eastchester County's fief at this time and spending his time hunting with his friends, but he immediately returned after I sent him a telegram informing him that I was invited to this ball by Member of Parliament Mocht. It's not only for this ball. There are many things that require my attention. My father, Earl Hall, would also frequently commute between Backlund and our fief before June," Hibbert seriously explained. "A gentleman who places great importance on his social image." Klein made a preliminary judgment. When Mary heard that, she asked in passing, "Is there anything still keeping you back? When are you leaving Backlund?" "Most of my work has already been completed. There's only one matter left. My sister, Audrey, is very interested in the Backlund Bike Company's 10% shares. She hired a specialized team to help her in the negotiations, and I'm responsible for overseeing the matter, Hibbert said without much thought. Backloaned by company's 10% shares? What a coincidence. I have to say that the circle of high society is quite small after all. Klein sighed inwardly as he deliberately mentioned, I also found a team to attempt to purchase the 10% shares, but I only managed to offer up to £9,000. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to compete with the other competitors and could only give up. Hibbert glanced at him with a look of surprise. You have good taste. He didn't mention how much his side's bid was, to prevent his competitor from participating again. £9,000. Mary silently muttered, realizing she had underestimated Dwayne Dantes' wealth. At this moment, the music for the third dance sounded. Hibbert Hall turned to Mary and said, May I have the pleasure of a dance with you? That's what I've been waiting for. Mary immediately extended her hand. This made Klein unable to exchange name cards with them. However, he wasn't in a rush, because it was still some time before the ball ended. After getting another plate of food, he enjoyed it while looking at the dance floor, admiring the madams and ladies dancing. During this process, he noticed that Member of Parliament Macht and Ma'am Rihanna were mingling with different guests from time to time, having happy conversations with them and even dancing with them. According to Walter, after confirming the guest list, the hosts need to seriously conclude every guest's preference and background, so as to tailor a different topic of conversation or jokes for them. This is to make everyone feel as though they are being treated uniquely. Socializing in high society sure is troublesome. Haha, this might be why Loanese gentlemen tend to have receding hairlines. Klein lampooned as he sighed in reflection. He retracted his gaze and looked at his cleared plate. He seriously considered if he should invite another lady or madam to a dance, or if he should eat a little more. At this moment, he caught Hazel Mock's figure through the corner of his eye. She was heading for the third story with hurried footsteps. Chapter 761. Good People and Good Deeds. What happened? Klein instantly tensed up. He had experienced too many accidents in the past, and he knew that he easily found himself involved in beyonder matters. Upon encountering something similar, he couldn't help but subconsciously be on alert. It did resemble some form of post-traumatic stress disorder. After seriously watching Hazel Mock's figure disappear from the staircase, Klein sensed that she was only in a hurry and wasn't panicking. This means that she has the matter under control. Besides, Mock is a member of Parliament of the House of Commons, a member of high society just below the nobles in the kingdom. There should be beyonders surround protecting him. Yes, Earl Hall's eldest son is here too, so his bodyguards must be beyonders as well. Besides, St. Samuel Cathedral is only a 10-minute carriage ride from Buckland Street. If anything were to really happen, the Nighthawks, priests, and bishops would rush over. Unless one has made up their mind to sacrifice themselves, no one would create an accident at this ball. Klein gradually calmed down and had another guess regarding Hazel's situation. She was rushing to the third story to resolve the negative effects of the mystical item. The question Klein had asked Rhodes previously was where he could obtain a mystical item which could steal the beyonder powers of others, and one of the answers he received was Hazel Mocked. Thinking back to their dance, Hazel's image rapidly reconstructed in Klein's mind with her different accessories as his focus. Hair ornaments, earrings, necklace, brooch, fishnet gloves. Which one could it be? Klein retracted his gaze and found himself thirsty. Hence, he picked up a cup of water and downed it. Just as he put down the cup, he saw his etiquette teacher, Wiana Heisen, approach him with a plate. This lady was dressed in a red dress, but she didn't look tawdry. She smiled at Dwayne Dantes and said, I noticed that you don't enjoy drinking alcohol. I've once missed an important matter as a result of drinking. Klein randomly fleshed up Dwayne Dantes' character as an experienced person with depth. Of course, he knew how to restrain himself. He didn't use his faceless powers to remove a finger to prove how determined he was when making that former oath. When Wiana heard that, she smiled and thought, Your past is filled with mystery. This is fatally attractive to many young ladies. She didn't continue on the topic as she said, I forgot to tell you that the problem my husband faced has been resolved. Klein picked up a cup of champagne and raised it. He then said with a smile, "This is something to be happy about. Congratulations." He didn't mention anything about him helping in secret. Wayana gave him a deep, penetrating look as she raised the cup of red wine in her hand. "Cheers." After clinking cups and taking a sip, Klein politely excused himself, put down his cup, and headed for the washroom. This wasn't because he wanted to head above the gray fog, but was solely due to the negative effects of death knell. He had drunk too much water and needed to relieve himself. When he walked out of the washroom, Klein looked up at the staircase that led from the second story to the third story. He found Hazel mocked walking down with unhurried footsteps. She wore an unperturbed expression. Indeed, it wasn't a huge problem. It's likely a result of the negative side effects of the mystical item she possesses. I wonder what it is. Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he casually swept the dance floor. During the interlude between two songs, he walked over to a lady and invited her to a dance. With Dwayne Dantes' appearance and bearing, his invitation was undoubtedly accepted. With him dancing, eating, chatting, and eating again, the ball slowly came to an end as the guests bade farewell one after another. Having completed his mission of exchanging name cards, Klein did the same. However, he wasn't the first or last person to leave. The hall soon turned silent as Ma'am Rihanna monitored the servants while they cleaned up the area. Meanwhile, she beckoned for her daughter, Hazel mocked. "Mr. Dwayne Dantes' performance was better than I imagined. Many ladies had even asked me about him in private," Ma'am Rihanna said in a veiled manner. "Hazel, what's your impression of him when you were dancing and chatting with him? You're a lot more mature than girls your age. I believe in your taste and judgment." She knew her daughter very well, and she had deliberately added the last sentence. Otherwise, Hazel was unlikely to be interested in giving a detailed answer. Hazel wasn't that arrogant when facing her mother. She said after some thought, "He's not very familiar with the circle, and he easily mentions topics that can be offensive, but he's very knowledgeable." Very knowledgeable. Ma'am Rihanna was slightly surprised as she repeated her daughter's words. With her understanding of Hazel, this was a rather good compliment. She couldn't help but be worried that her daughter had taken a liking to Dwayne Dantes. Hazel thinks little of the eligible bachelors around her because they are too young, inexperienced, and incapable. Dwayne Dantes happens to be the kind of man that girls who mature early like. Rihanna suddenly felt a little regret inviting the gentleman to the ball. She knew that with Hazel's personality, she might very well elope if she were to suffer any objection to her newfound love. Hazel seemed to sense her mother's thoughts and said without emotion, "I only like men who are sufficiently powerful." Phew. Rihanna silently heaved a sigh of relief as she was no longer worried about the problem from before. This was because Hazel was a girl who found lying beneath her. Late at night, Hazel got up from bed. With her night vision, she changed into clothes that facilitated movement. She climbed down from her bedroom's balcony and carefully avoided her family's bodyguards. She went all the way to the garden and came to the middle of Buckland Street. Not every sewer manhole allowed a human passage with vertical metal ladders. Hazel adeptly moved the manhole cover away and climbed down before closing the cover from underneath. Nearly 45 minutes after, she moved the manhole cover again and returned into the shadows of the street. At this moment, Hazel saw a shadow nimbly flip into a garden nearby. Unit 160? She read the corresponding address. It was none other than Dwayne Dantes' residence. On the manor's third story, Klein was once again awoken from his sleep due to his spiritual intuition. He had the urge to capture the infiltrator that disturbed his sleep and feed it to creeping hunger. This time, he directly opened his iron cigar case and released his wraith marionette. Senor, in his dark red coat, first walked into the full-body mirror before leaping over to the oriel window in his valet's room. He observed Richardson and saw the valet sit up as he looked at the door with fear and anxiety. The door silently opened as a shadow flashed in. Under the crimson moonlight, the infiltrator exposed brownish-yellow skin, a soft outline, and short curly black hair. He obviously hailed from the southern continent. With a gloomy cold aura, he stood by the door and looked at Richardson, saying in a deep voice, "Have you decided? Do not believe that you can attain your calm life by leaving. Inside of you flows the blood of death's subjects. You are destined to give up everything to restore God's glory. Think about your deceased mother. Think about the insults you once suffered. Do you wish that your child will grow up under the contemptuous looks of others, to be a servant of others forever? But what can I do? Richardson lowered his head as he said with great difficulty. Wait for the mission. The infiltrator's voice turned gentler. Richardson didn't commit to an answer as he seemed to be struggling inwardly. As for the infiltrator, he didn't seem to care about his hesitation. He treated it as though Richardson had agreed, turned around, left the room, and traced his steps back. Death subject? Someone from the Numinous Episcopate, or another organization that's trying to restore Balaam? Having witnessed everything, Klein leaned back into bed and silently said, "What mission would they give Richardson? Steal my money to provide funds for the organization? Or will they create a terrorist incident at one of the balls of high society?" At that moment, the infiltrator had climbed down from the balcony, passed through the garden, and flipped over the perimeter fence made of steel bars. Suddenly, he saw a figure pounce over from his left. He dodged as he clenched his fist and threw a punch. Thud. The punch hit the black figure, but it pierced straight through. It was as though he had struck a shadow created by the street lamp. Meanwhile, he suffered a heavy blow to the back of his head as he fainted onto the ground. Hazel's figure immediately surfaced behind the infiltrator as she wore an excited expression. It was as though she had completed a successful scam. She quickly reined in her emotions as she maintained her arrogant demeanor. She turned to look at the black metal gates of 160 Buckland Street. This girl bent her back and held the infiltrator by the arm as she dragged him to Dwayne Dantes' doorstep. Immediately after that, Hazel let go of her left hand, cleaned up any traces, walked forward with her chin slightly lifted, and pulled the doorbell. Then she quickly departed, heading straight to her home through the shadows in the street. And on a street lamp outside Unit 160, on the black metal gate was a piece of glass. It reflected a figure wearing a dark red coat and an old triangular hat. It had seen the entire process. How should I deal with this? Inside the room, Klein was stumped. He knew that Hazel was doing a good anonymous deed for her neighbor to finish off an infiltrator, but this way, if his butler were to make a police report, the matter would be investigated in detail, causing the matter to be transferred to the Nighthawks. When the time came, whoever struck the infiltrator unconscious would become an important question. If Klein was really an ordinary person, it wouldn't have mattered. He could allow the Nighthawks to carry out their investigation. However, not only was he a powerful Sequence 5 Beyonder, but he was also scheming to steal an item from behind Cheney's gate. He didn't wish for any external setbacks to spoil his plans, or else he would have to change identities once again. To be frank, his earliest solution was to find a way to terminate Richardson's services. However, what he had heard changed his mind a little. If I were to terminate Richardson's services, it would be equivalent to pushing him into the abyss despite his desire for a quiet life. It will force him to mix with those people. Unfortunately, Dwayne Dantes has a mission, otherwise, helping him in passing wouldn't be difficult. Klein sighed as he thought. 10 seconds later, the unconscious infiltrator suddenly stood up, cracked his neck, and hid in the nearby shadows. And at this moment, Butler Walter had walked out of the house's main door after hearing the doorbell. Chapter 762, Nation Reestablishment Society at the gates. Walter used the light from the street lamps and discovered no one was outside through the gaps. The street was silent. For an instant, Walter suspected if he had heard wrong and that the doorbell hadn't rung. He composed himself, and he quickly walked to the servant quarters at the back of the compound. He woke up a few servants and got them to carry double-barreled hunting rifles to begin patrolling the main building so as to prevent any bandits or burglars from infiltrating. Walter didn't immediately get the police, because nothing had happened yet. The doorbell from earlier might have been a prank from a tramp. Meanwhile, under the nearby sewers, the infiltrator was holding onto the metal handles as he slowly headed down into the unlit area. He soon came to a halt, leaned back onto the moss-covered wall, and slowly slid down to sit down on the dirty ground. His eyes closed again as though he was still in an unconscious state. In front of him, a middle-aged man wearing a dark red coat and an old triangular hat instantly appeared. He was none other than Klein's marionette, Wraith Senor. Senor bent down, rummaged through the infiltrator's pockets and found 7 soldi and 11 pence, as well as tiny cloth bags containing different kinds of powders. Inside the room, Klein remotely controlled his marionette from dozens of meters away. As he identified the powder, he discovered that his theories were correct. They were all herbal powder in the death domain, and a portion of them could be used for spirit channeling. He was very likely to be a beyonder from the corpse collector pathway that hailed from Balam. Even if he hadn't reached sequence 7 spirit medium, it was very normal for him to prepare the corresponding herbal powders, essential oils, and extract. After all, these materials weren't only used for spirit channeling. Immediately, Klein controlled Senor to set up a ritual to pray to the fool. Then he went above the gray fog to respond, allowing Senor to complete what followed. After doing all of this, he returned to the real world and continued controlling Senor, allowing him to channel the spirit. Passing through a storm of glimmers, Klein saw the infiltrator's spirit. He appeared listless, blurry, and translucent. "What's your name? What faction do you belong to?" Senor asked with a deep voice. The infiltrator answered blankly, "Gadotpos. I belong to the Black Skeleton Gang." Black Skeleton Gang. I believe it's a gang that's active around the border of East Borough and the dock area close to the Backland Bridge area. It's mainly filled with people of Balam heritage. Although they aren't as barbaric and boorish as the Zmanger gang, they aren't strangers to violence. As Klein recalled the intelligence he had previously gathered, he made Senor continue asking, "What do you mainly do? Why are you looking for Richardson?" Gadotpos answered in a muddled state, "We are fighting for God. We were originally members of the Balam Nation Re-Establishment Society. We established the Black Skeleton Gang to grasp various intel and obtain funds. Apart from that, we also have another mission. It is to seek out any items related to death and send it back to the southern continent. This time, we obtained verified information that in Earl Wolf's collection is a mask taken out from the Eggers family mausoleum. This family is a descendant of God. For this mask, we need to send someone to infiltrate Earl Wolf's household as a servant or infiltrate during one of the balls and banquets he hosts. And Richardson is an excellent choice. He has no history with any of the other organizations, and he's an experienced servant. The servants of nobles are often inherited. It's obviously not easy to infiltrate. Only short-term employments will be made if there's a sudden need for plenty of manpower. Speaking of which, there really is such a situation. At the ball today, a few ladies had mentioned that some nobles who are financially tight will sell lots of their lands and manors, and also dismiss nearly all their servants, leaving fewer than 10 to serve them, so as to barely maintain a decent lifestyle. When there are large-scale balls or banquets that require manpower, they would spend money to hire a bunch of temporary workers from the Family Servant Assistance Association to keep up a front. Also, Earl Wolf actually has a mask from the descendants of Death's family. I recall Mr. Azek's last name to be Eggers. Unfortunately, I don't wish to be disturbed by any accidents at the moment, otherwise, I might have come up with a way to help Mr. Azek obtain that mask. Klein mumbled silently and made Senor continue asking, "How do you know Richardson?" Gadotpos said blankly, "We got to know each other at a manor in East Balam. Back then we were both slaves. Among the slaves, there are people who secretly spread the faith of death. Richardson, his mother, and I couldn't help but become believers of death in such a life. We secretly joined an organization that had a lot of influence among the slaves there. Later, Richardson's mother passed away from an illness, and he was brought to Backland, while I stayed in East Balam before I found an opportunity to escape. A few years later, I was sent to Backland, and I chanced upon Richardson. He actually forgot about his mother's death and the abuse he had once received. He forgot his faith towards God, and had his will eroded by what he called a peaceful life. To avoid me, he deliberately made mistakes and kept switching employers, but how could he have guessed that his former companion is no longer an ordinary human? Everyone has the right to choose as long as they don't harm others. However, Richardson and I are two different kinds of people. In the room, Klein closed his eyes and made Senor ask in a deep voice, What's the organization that is very influential among the slaves? Grappos hesitated for a moment and said, the Eternal Life Society. Those who believe in death will obtain eternal life in the underworld once they leave the real world that's filled with pain and sorrow. Eternal Life Society. I'm aware of this. It's a branch of the numinous episcopate. As a former Nighthawk, Klein knew quite a lot about such matters. He continued controlling Senor to interrogate Gadotpos, and he obtained plenty of information regarding the Eternal Life Society, East Balam Nation Reestablishment Society, and the Black Skull Gang, while confirming that Gadotpos and his gang had their hands covered in the blood of the innocent. After finishing the spirit channeling and clearing up any traces, he waited 30 minutes before letting the wraith enter Gadotpos's body, controlling him to climb out of the sewers and returning back into the shadows of the streets. And at this point, the servants in 160 Baclun Street, who were wielding double-barreled hunting rifles, were no longer as vigilant while doing their patrolling rounds. They seemed to believe that any latent danger had passed. Klein pretended as though he didn't notice anything as he continued sleeping in his master bedroom. However, he had already set up a ritual to summon and respond to himself. With Azek's copper whistle, the iron cigar case, and creeping hunger, he silently left his residence in the form of a spirit. He followed behind Gadotpos and constantly maintained a distance of 80 meters. By using his marionette to possess this hostage, he made him circle to another street and board a rental carriage by the side of the road. About an hour later, Gadotpos returned to the headquarters of the Black Skeleton Gang, a tiny house situated near the docks. There were plenty of firearms stashed away here, with several operatives that were sent from the East Balam Nation Reestablishment Society. They formed the upper ranks of the Black Skeleton Gang. Following the method that was agreed upon, Gadotpos knocked on the door, and he said to a member who came towards him, "Richardson has submitted." "Very good." The member inattentively shot Gadotpos a glance, made way for him, and gave him passage. Gadotpos surveyed the area and found the high-yield explosives and a bunch of rifles stacked in the corner of the house. A few of the top brass of the Black Skeleton Gang were gathered together, discussing something. "Gadotpos, want a smoke?" The member from before handed him a cigarette. This was a cigarette fashioned to the preferences of the southern continent. They were made from dried tobacco leaves mixed with tiny amounts of herbs. Gadotpos received the cigarette and casually picked up a box of matchsticks from the table, took out a few sticks, and lit them. Then he threw the few burning matchsticks to the corner where the easily flammable explosives were. Everyone present looked at Gadotpos with a dumbfounded look, momentarily at a loss as to what had happened. Rumble. On a public bench dozens of meters away, Klein sat there as the flames blazed behind him, a hot gust of air swarming out of the house. A few seconds later, Senor in his dark red coat appeared beside him, with some signs of being burned. The wraith held his hand to his chest and bowed before returning inside the gold coin inside the iron cigar case. "Unfortunately, I won't be able to pick up the Beyonder characteristics. Otherwise, it wouldn't appear like an accident. It'll definitely be suspicious if the upper echelons of the Black Skeleton Gang don't have any Beyonders." Klein silently sighed as he cleared any traces before ending the summoning and returning above the gray fog. The next morning, he got up and washed up as though nothing had happened. He then waited for his valet to bring in a change of clothes. Richardson entered in silence as he finished his work skillfully. Following that, he took a step back and bowed his head. "Sir, after serving you this week, I wish to resign." He typically received a weekly salary from housekeeper Taneja. "Why?" Klein looked at himself in the mirror as he adjusted his vest. Meanwhile, he leisurely thought, not bad at all. You know how to resign by your own volition and not bring trouble to your employer. Richardson had already thought of an excuse. "I believe I'm lacking in ability to be a valet. At last night's ball, I realized how lacking I was when I was interacting with the servants of the other guests." Klein smiled. "Everyone begins with 0 experience. Few grew up with experience. Consider it again, and give me your final answer tomorrow." "Yes, sir." Richardson didn't speak further as he took the initiative to leave the room. He went to the first floor to help his employer pick up the morning papers. During this process, He would always first flip through it and place the most interesting articles at the top. While flipping through, his gaze froze as he focused on an article. An explosion happened at 79 Durham Street in the Backland Bridge area. It's suspected to be related to the Black Skeleton Gang. According to the police, all the upper echelons of the Black Skeleton Gang died in this accident, including Lima, Morera, Gapos. Richardson shook his head, suspecting that he was dreaming. Chapter 763, Mr. X 160 Backland Street. Inside the dining hall on the second story. Klein had just bitten into the buttered toast his servant had served him when he saw his butler walk in. Walter bowed and said, "Sir, a person of unknown origins pulled our doorbell last night. As it was already very late, I didn't wake you up and instead got the servants to patrol the area with the double-barreled hunting rifles. If you so permit it, I'll visit the nearby police station to get them to reinforce the patrols on this street at night." To employ such a butler, there aren't any flaws aside from him being expensive. Klein nodded slightly and drank the fresh milk that had been delivered to him. Very good. 39 Backland Street, Member of Parliament Mock's house. Hazel entered the activity room on the second floor and saw her mother, Rihanna, chatting with the housekeeper. What happened? She pushed a lock of black-green hair to the back of her ear. Rihanna chuckled and said, "Someone rang Dante's doorbell late last night." A prank? Hazel sat down. No one knows. Anyways, Dante's butler specially went to the police station this morning. Rihanna recounted what she had learned from her servant. Hazel nodded slightly and said, "It's best to have the police involved." But it's useless. No one knows who pulled the doorbell. Apparently, there wasn't anyone there. Rihanna laughed while shaking her head. Hazel was taken aback as she blurted out, "There wasn't anyone there?" That's right. Dante's butler only seemed to ask the police to double their efforts on the night patrols on our street. That's good news. As the wife of a member of Parliament of the House of Commons, and the daughter of a famous lawyer, Rihanna had very good relations with the police. Not a single person, Hazel repeated softly before falling into silence. After a while, she left the activity room and returned to the third story. Along the way, she couldn't help but clench her fist and swing it as though she was testing something. In between her brows was a clear look of puzzlement. Inside his bedroom, Klein looked at the large pile of gold coins in front of him. All he saw was the shiny color of gold. There was a total of 4,000 pounds of gold coins. After a week of gathering funds, Admiral of Stars Katlia had finally completed the transaction for the Scales of Luck. Apart from the gold coins, she had also paid another 6,500 pounds in cash. To be honest, having a pile of gold coins is way more visually shocking than a pile of cash of the same size. As Klein sighed, he took out the 13 lone gold coins he received from Senor, from his pocket and threw it into the pile. After doing all of this, he took out the adventurer's harmonica and blew into it. Silently, Rionette Tynker appeared in front of him with the 4 blonde, red-eyed heads in her hand. "Ma'am, this is the first installment, a total of 4,013 pounds. Klein retracted his gaze from the pile of gold coins and looked at Miss Messenger. He was actually quite curious as to how Miss Messenger would move such a huge pile of gold coins. He remembered that she always used her teeth when collecting letters. "Very good, you still have 5,987, Rionette Tynker's head said one after another. "There's no need to remind me." Klein forced a smile and said, "I'll try to gather the rest as soon as possible." Rionette Tynker didn't speak further as one of the heads tried hard to open its mouth. Suddenly, the area before her turned dark and deep. All the gold coins were sucked up by vortex-like surging water. In a few short seconds, the large pile of gold coins vanished. Rionette Tynker's 4 heads nodded at the same time before returning to the spirit world. "I still have 8,156 pounds and 5 lone gold coins. I can barely be considered a tycoon. I could actually afford any investment opportunities if they appear, and it won't just be me raising the price and mentioning it in passing. This way, I won't be suspected to be a cheat for the time being. Haha, be a little optimistic." Perhaps the investment opportunity might allow me to earn back the money I spent. It's always fast to make money work for you. Klein silently exhaled as he cast his gaze out the window, forcing himself to enjoy the thinly fogged streets. At night time in the East Borough, the surrounding area was pitch black due to the few street lamps available, along with many of them being damaged. It was as though there were countless monsters and criminals lurking within. Zio Dericha wore a hooded cloak, turned into a small alley, and came outside to what seemed like a dilapidated house. This was the new gathering in East Borough she had previously mentioned to Furs. Zio wasn't in a rush to knock on the door with the agreed-upon signal. She first looked down to check her attire. Unlike how she usually dressed, she wore a pair of long boots. They didn't look odd, but Zio knew very well that the soles were very thick. She had stuffed plenty of things inside, allowing a person to magically appear taller. And this effectively hid Zio's greatest characteristic. Feeling assured by the presence of her triangular blade, Zio pulled her hood up and knocked on the door with the signal. Soon, she was led into an activity room inside as she randomly found a spot to sit down. After the participants had mostly arrived, the host of the gathering finally walked in. He was of medium build, with a height of about 1.75 m. He wore a black classical robe, a pointed mage hat, with a brass mask on his face. He gave off an ancient and mysterious vibe. Rather dark skin, but it's not exactly brown. He resembles someone from Faina Potter or Desi Bay. But I can't be sure. It might be a tan. He has raven black curly hair. This does match my first guess. Zio sized him up as a sheriff. The man in the brass mask looked around the room before laughing deeply. You can call me Mr. X. Mr. X? Zio couldn't help but twitch the corners of her mouth. After becoming an outer circle member of MI9, she had learned quite a bit of the situations regarding the secret organizations, and that included the Aurora Order. Therefore, she knew very well that the oracles of the Aurora Order used alphabets as their code names, and they enjoyed addressing themselves as Mr. or Ma'am. And from her point of view, to address themselves in front of others in such a manner was obvious exposure of their identity and background. After all, the members who participated in these gatherings were mostly Beyonders who were lacking in knowledge. Isn't he afraid that others would report him? It's no wonder the gentleman from MI9 said that the Aurora Order is filled with lunatics, that there's no way to understand their actions with the logic of the average person. Ever since Mr. A vanished, there have been a few gatherings in Backlund that had impersonators, or gatherings that were hosted by his associates for their own benefit. The hosts were quickly reported and ended up being arrested. It's not necessarily the case that Mr. X is from the Aurora Order. Perhaps he's just like the others. Zio retracted her observing gaze and silently watched the gathering continue. She seldom reported matters, because she had experience as an unaffiliated Beyonder. She knew it wasn't easy to survive in this world with such identities. So long as there wasn't any accidents, she wouldn't provide such intel to MI9. If it's confirmed that he's an oracle of the Aurora Order, I'll report him. These people are all lunatics. They will bring about extreme danger. As Zio thought over the matter, she watched the others exchange information and complete trades. She didn't participate much in it, firstly because there wasn't any information or item of interest, and secondly, she was saving up for her interrogator potion. After the end of the gathering, she returned to her residence at Sherwood Borough. Zio saw Furs wearing a face mask that was said to be able to moisturize faces as she lay there leisurely reading. How was it? How was that gathering? Furs asked, pretending as though she wasn't interested. Zio threw her cloak to the side and said, there were quite a number of participants, and there were quite a number of items as well, but they were mostly for low-sequence Beyonders. No one will offer anything good at the first gathering, Furs said as she lowered the novel in her hands. Yeah. Zio nodded and said, the organizer of the gathering calls himself Mr. X, but no one knows if he's related to Mr. A. Mr. X? A suspected Aurora Order oracle. Could he be Louis Veen? Furs's attention was caught as she languidly leaned back and asked, what does he look like? He wore a mask. Zio rolled her eyes at her. Do you think I have the ability to see through an obstacle? Chapter 764. First investigation. Klein was returning from St. Samuel Cathedral to Buckland Street on a four-wheeled carriage when he heard the stacked, illusory pleas. The female. It's nothing urgent. All he did was make a rough judgment and didn't immediately head above the gray fog to respond. Sweeping his glance at the street lamps which were dispelling the darkness, Klein retracted his gaze and raised the white porcelain with gold rims to take a sip. Beside him, Richardson noticed this and said after mustering his courage, "Sir, I've thought it through. You're very right. Everyone starts with zero experience. Few grow up with experience. Thank you for giving me this chance to grow." After confirming that Gadapos and gang were dead, he was finally at ease as he began considering his professional career. Switching employers repeatedly in a short period of time was a stain on a servant's record. Once he resigned from Dwayne Dantes's employ, Richardson believed that it would be difficult for him to continue being a valet. This would be extremely damaging for him. This was not only because a valet's annual salary was at least £25 and was way better than any non-management jobs. It was comparable to a lady's maid, and being a valet gave one the greatest opportunity of becoming a butler. By following their male or female employers and helping them in all kinds of trivialities, being their mouthpiece and assistant would allow them to build up their skills. It would allow them to grasp all the traits needed for being a butler and, as a result, become their employer's confidant. As long as there was a chance, one could easily be made a land steward, butler assistants, or deputy butler, as they were slowly promoted to a butler. Richardson did yearn for a peaceful life, but this didn't mean that he was willing to be a servant his entire life. Without a doubt, he wished to rely on his hard work to earn more and gain a higher standing. And becoming the butler of a wealthy family was his ultimate goal. "It's not too late to realize that now," Klein replied with a smile, consenting to Richardson's retention. After returning to 160 Buckland Street, he instructed housekeeper Taneja to prepare supper for him at 11:30 as he headed to the third story where he took off his coat and entered the bathroom. At that moment, the bathtub had already been heated to an appropriate temperature by a maid 5 minutes ahead of time. Klein wasn't in a rush to take his bath, as he went above the gray fog to determine who had prayed to him. "Mistress, traveler, Miss Magician is rather efficient. Without realizing it, she has matured quite well," Klein muttered to himself. After some serious consideration, he conjured the world Gehrman sparrow and made this fake person pray amidst the veil of the gray fog. "Give me the time, location, and provide more information. Only then will I take action." Klein's idea was very simple. He found a traveler's powers rather useful, but it was difficult for Dwayne Dantes to have a period of prolonged absence from Buckland Street, or stay in his room all the time. It would be fine if Miss Magician could provide detailed and reliable intel, allowing him to carry out the assassination once. But if she were to get the world to slowly gather information bit by bit, there was no way he could do it, as it affected his own plans. Soon, Furs gave a reply. "I'll try to gather it as quickly as possible." As the location and timing for Mr. X's next gathering hadn't been confirmed, all she could do was patiently wait. After settling this matter, Klein returned to the real world, took off his clothes, and placed himself into the bathtub. The warm water enveloped him as he closed his eyes in comfort. He felt that the fatigue that plagued his body and mind were being washed away bit by bit. During this period of time, he had been to St. Samuel Cathedral a few times to listen to Bishop Electra's explanation of the revelation of Evernight. He had grasped the looks and characteristics of another two keepers, but he hadn't seen any repeated sightings, preventing him from determining the schedule of the keepers. And doing such acts would similarly bring him trouble. Klein opened his eyes as he looked at the steam above him, sighing inwardly. The first investigation should be coming soon. A person who often entered St. Samuel Cathedral's interior would likely be investigated by the Nighthawks, and with his origins still an unknown, such an investigation was almost necessary. If there aren't any investigations, it would be a serious case of negligence for the Nighthawks. Klein slowly exhaled. In the basement of St. Samuel Cathedral, Leonard slowly walked out of a quiet room. His green eyes had a tint of strange black water as countless illusory bubbles and ripples appeared and disappeared. Not bad. You're already a soul assurer and are almost catching up to me. Standing in the corridor was Daily Simone as she congratulated him in a self-deprecating manner. She was still wearing her hooded black robe, with blue eyeshadow and blush. She had quite an uncanny sense of beauty. When Leonard looked at this familiar lady, he found her bearing even colder than before. There seemed to be countless shadows hidden around her, in layers that went deep and felt cold. Clearly, I'm still very far from you. With your condition, you should be able to advance to gatekeeper, right? Leonard didn't act too casual in front of Daly, speaking rather formally. This was because if he attempted to make any jokes, the one who would eventually be left blushing in embarrassment would definitely be him instead of the lady. Gatekeeper was sequence 5 of the death pathway. I was ready 2 months ago, Daly said without concealing anything, her expression slightly warped. Leonard roughly understood what she meant as he nodded slightly. You haven't contributed enough. Daly curled her lips immediately. That's right. It's like I'm already in bed with everything in place, only to realize that there aren't any condoms at home. Worst of all, it's late at night, and most of the stores around the neighborhood have closed for the day. What an amazing analogy. Leonard didn't think it was right of him to respond as he said with a smile, you can choose to handle certain cases. Without giving Daly a chance to speak, he pointed at the other end of the corridor. Captain Soest is still waiting for me to report on my advancement. Daly didn't say a word as she watched him leave. By the time his back disappeared around the corner, this lady's expression seemed to turn to drift as she muttered softly, Captain Soest. In the room where Leonard's Red Gloves team was temporarily stationed in, Soest, who had just become a spirit warlock, saw his desultory subordinate walk in as he casually threw a dossier over. Very good. You've already advanced. I'll congratulate you later. First, investigate this target's dream. It was already late at night, but for the Nighthawks who were mainly staffed with sleepless, it was no different from day. They even felt stronger at night. Isn't this something the local Nighthawks do? Leonard received the dossier and asked in passing. They've recently been swamped with cases and are lacking in manpower. They've requested our help, Soest explained without much care. Leonard didn't ask further as he looked down and flipped through the dossier. The first thing that he caught sight of was a photograph, and the middle-aged gentleman on it had given him a deep impression. Dwayne Dennis. Leonard's pupils instantly constricted. He knew this man, aware that this person was an undying monster who had survived since the 4th epoch. He was at least a saint or even stronger. Furthermore, he knows my secret and old man's identity. Leonard instinctively raised his hand to rub his temples. Captain Soest, I just advanced, and my spirituality is a little out of control. Is that so? Only then did Soest realize that he might have made a mistake. He hurriedly turned to look at another red glove and said, Albert, you do it. Albert was a man in his 30s. His hair was slightly blonde, and his skin was pale. He didn't look too healthy. Leonard heaved a sigh of relief as he handed the dossier over to him. At this moment, his heart suddenly skipped a beat. Would Albert suffer any negative effects if he were to enter the undying monster's dream? At that moment, he felt a little regretful. He believed that he should have done it himself. At the very least, he knew the level of danger and had faced him before. It wouldn't result in him provoking him. Dwayne Dantes likely won't do anything to Albert. If he has any excessive reaction and causes anything abnormal to happen to Albert, he would immediately expose his problems to us. And with our church's strength and Backlund's situation, there's no way he can leave this city alive. Leonard quickly calmed down, believing that Dwayne Dantes would use a milder manner to avoid the dream investigation. He pulled over a chair and sat beside Albert. Although he appeared like he was reading the papers without much thought, he was constantly watching him to prevent any accidents from happening. 160 Backlund Street, inside the master bedroom. Klein suddenly woke up in his dream, aware that someone had come. The investigation of the Nighthawks? As he mumbled, he surveyed the area and found himself in the half-open room. Following that, he heard knocks on the door. Come on in. Klein tried hard to make his voice sound like a dreamy murmur. The doorknob twisted as the door opened. A thinly built blond man dressed in a black trench coat walked in. He was none other than the Red Glove, Albert. I'm a superintendent from the Backland Police Department. Albert casually showed proof of his identity and sat opposite Klein. How may I help you, officer? Klein got into character. He knew that due to the influence of a nightmare, he needed to appear normal. Albert conjured a stack of papers and began reading them softly. Dwayne Dantes. Hails from Desi County. He repeated all the intelligence that had been gathered and asked, "Is this set of information legitimate?" "Partially, but some of them are fake," Klein replied, honestly. "The only partial truths are probably male and single." Meanwhile, he was making self-deprecating comments. Albert was pleased that he had made progress so quickly as he asked with a deadpan expression, "Which of these are fake?" Klein was already prepared for that as he pretended to recall. "Most of my wealth doesn't come from mining, but from adventuring in the southern continent." He fabricated a story from Anderson's description of West Balam about how a commoner earned his wealth by relying on his eloquence, intel, experience, and guts in an area that conflict often happened between Lone and Intis. This story wasn't considered very detailed, and it was mainly an outline. The main goal was to make the Nighthawks believe that Dwayne Dantes wasn't a Beyonder, but just an ordinary person with a sense of adventure and risk. Such stories of people getting rich were common in Lone. Chapter 765. Monday. Again after Klein was done, Albert asked a few targeted questions according to his recount to ensure that the details matched up. Without a doubt, he obtained a satisfactory answer. "Thank you for your cooperation. Have a great dream." Albert smiled as he got up and bowed. Then he used his nightmare powers to influence Dwayne Dantes once again. It would make him have a vague recollection that he had such a dream when he woke up, but he wouldn't be able to recall the specifics. After doing all of this, he turned to head for the door, turned the doorknob, and left the dream. Indeed, the Nighthawks placed too much trust in nightmare powers. If I were to be the one leading this investigation, I would definitely design a series of questions that attack the matter from different angles ahead of time, and then do cross-referencing to find any loopholes. The best method is to enlist Miss Justice's help in creating a set of professional psychological questionnaires and get the target to finish it in the dream. If he were faking something, the psychological state and the image he wishes to project would definitely show contradictions from different evaluations. This is unless he's also a psychological expert and can spot the true goals of each set of questions. Klein leaned back into the sofa and cast his gaze out the window. In the darkness, the street lamp's glow appeared dim and pale, illuminating the surroundings in a gloomy silence. Klein silently observed for a few seconds before he curled his lips and gave a self-deprecating smile. And in the basement of St. Samuel Cathedral, Leonard first heaved a sigh of relief after he saw Albert wake up normally and heard his report. He felt even more fearful of the undying monster from the fourth epoch. City of Silver. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating every street. Derek Berg walked out of his house with the axe of Hurricane in his possession as he headed for the Twin Towers that was north of the city. Along the way, he met several residents of the City of Silver. They were either busy, sending their children for general education lessons, or patrolling every corner in groups. It was to prevent anyone from turning into an evil spirit after dying from an accident at home and being without a relative to end their lives. The existence of these people made the City of Silver appear lively, and from time to time, Derek could hear the laughter and cheers from little children. He couldn't help but recall the days in Afternoon Town. The number of humans he met every day had numbered about 20, and most of the time, they needed to stay in a garrisoned building. Outside were monsters that lurked in houses under the cloak of darkness. They were eradicated again and again, but they would appear time and time again from unknown places. Every team member from the expedition felt a sense of helplessness towards this, as though there was no way of gaining true safety. They could never feel at ease with the need to go all out at any time. There was no chance for them to relax at all. No ordinary creature would wish to maintain such states of high stress and vigilance for prolonged periods of time. Therefore, in regards to that, the City of Silver had already developed a rotation system. It didn't take much time for the first expedition team to go from Afternoon Town back to the City of Silver, but there was the unavoidable quarantine and relaxation period. It was only today that Derek had managed to adjust himself to a mental state which he believed he could withstand the negative effects from advancing. He had previously reported to Chief Colin Iliad that he had obtained the potion formula to notary, and he was allowed to use this discovery to exchange for the corresponding Beyonder ingredients, feathers of a spirit-packed bird. As for the items he owed the moon, he had obtained them from patrolling Afternoon Town's surroundings and had passed them to him with Mr. Fool's help. After advancing, I'll be qualified to select a mystical item for non-high sequence Beyonders. Derek felt a little expectant as he sped up his pace and arrived at the Twin Towers. Although the material warehouse and the mystical items were all in the spire where they were watched by the 6-member council, Derek's goal was the steeple, because that was where he could exchange his contribution points for items. Just as he was about to enter the steeple, he felt his spiritual perception trigger. He subconsciously looked up at the spire, and he saw a woman in a black, purple-patterned robe standing behind a window, looking down at him. She had silver-grayish hair, light gray eyes, and a beautiful face. She was none other than one elders of the 6-member council, Shepherd Lovia. When their eyes met, Lovia's gaze seemed to penetrate his soul, but her expression remained the same. She even nodded slightly as though she was greeting him. "She's not greeting me, but the person behind me." Suddenly, Derek came to a realization. This was from the experience he slowly accumulated under the guidance of the Tarot Club. He nodded in response as he retracted his gaze without any signs of abnormality. He then unhurriedly entered the steeple. At night, in a private harbor in Byam, the Golden Dream, with its strange main cannon in the middle, docked by the side of the harbor. Danitz carried the local specialties that the Resistance had given him as he waved at them with a beaming smile while he headed up the gangway to the deck. He had been leading an extremely comfortable life in recent times. As an envoy who sent arms, food, and small amounts of Beyonder ingredients, he received quite good treatment. He either ate sumptuously or enjoyed himself by hunting and bragging. He was even invited to watch the ritual in which the sea god blessed his believers. After witnessing all of this, he suddenly came to a realization. Byam, or perhaps all the colonies, would eventually embroil themselves in an intense conflict. It was something that wouldn't ease with decades or even a century. Therefore, Danitz decided to sell most of his properties in Byam, leaving behind only one piece of property. He then found a chance to buy properties in the Intis capital, Trier, and the Lone capital, Backlund, as well as extremely idyllic and peaceful villages. I can also take the opportunity to return to Elima town and visit the old man and mom. Yes, I can buy one less house and get them a vineyard. Danitz waved passionately at the Resistance once again. He then puffed up his chest and said smugly to Flowery Bow-Tie Jodson, "Where's Captain? I need to report to her on the recent developments." Jodson sked in contempt. "She's obviously in the captain's cabin." Meanwhile, he lampooned inwardly, "This fellow is becoming more and more arrogant after establishing ties with Gehrman Sparrow. However, that crazy adventurer is really terrifying. He actually managed to hunt Admiral of Blood." "Heh!" Danitz scoffed as he walked with a provocative gait and entered the cabin where he met Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina Edwards. He instantly stopped his provocative look as he smiled. "Captain, I've completed the mission." "Details?" Edwina put down the book in her hand as she asked. Danitz was already prepared as he gave a detailed description of what had happened recently while exaggerating his importance. When he was done, he said, "Captain, I met Gehrman Sparrow, and he got me to ask you if there have been any abnormalities with elvish songster Ciadaz's corpse and that golden wine cup." Edwina didn't answer him directly as she walked to a corner in the captain's cabin. Sitting there was a black wooden chest. The Golden Dream was setting sail for Sonia Island, so Ciadaz's and Mobit's remains remained on the ship. They were stored by Edwina in a specially prepared chest. Bending one knee in genuflection, Edwina opened the wooden chest, allowing the interlocked remains to see the light of day. The mostly squashed golden wine cup was held silently in a bony palm without any abnormal signs. "There's nothing abnormal." Edwina gave the conclusion. Danitz shot a glance and memorized the answer, preparing to report this to the mighty fool once there wasn't anyone around, so that he could forward the message to the lunatic, Gehrman Sparrow. Nothing abnormal? Above the gray fog, Klein frowned slightly, feeling a mixture of puzzlement and ease. According to his theory, there was a high chance that there was a problem with the Golden Cup. To have nothing abnormal happen to it had exceeded his expectations. However, he also liked the answer. This was because he didn't wish for Siadaza's and Mobit's eternal slumber to be disturbed. Perhaps it needs other additional catalysts? Heh, let's hope that never happens. Klein muttered to himself before casting his gaze onto the junk pile where Grozel's travels was. As he temporarily didn't have any intention of entering the sea of collective subconscious, along with his recent focus being on the Antigonus family's notebook, he had delayed his plans of searching the book world a second time. Phew. Klein exhaled, retracted his gaze and prepared for this week's tarot gathering. 3 in the afternoon, Backlund time. Dark red beams of light shot up along the two sides of the long mottled table, materializing into different blurry figures. As usual, Audrey was in a good mood, or perhaps in a better mood than usual. This was because her brother, Hibbert Hall, had sent a telegram informing her that the purchase of the Backlund Bike Company's 10% shares was completed for a total of £12,000. Furthermore, she didn't need to rush back to Backlund to sign any documents. Before Hibbert set off, she had signed a letter of authorization while under the witness of 2 lawyers. All she needed to do now was wait for everything to be over before signing a letter of confirmation for her brother. Audrey curled up the corners of her lips as she stood up and said to the figure sitting at the end of the bronze table who was concealed by gray fog, "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. May Mr. Fool bless me. I hope there will be clues to the fruit of an illusory chime tree today." Immediately after that, she began praying in silence. After exchanging greetings and taking their seats, Katlia didn't let down Klein's expectations. Once again, she lowered her head without daring to look straight at him. "Mr. Fool, there are 3 pages of Emperor Rozel's diary this time. Has that Queen Mystic still not found the clues to why Emperor Rozel was assassinated? She's still providing diary pages through Ma'am Hermit? What a pity. I've recently been in the fief, and I haven't had much contact with the psychology alchemists. I can't even obtain new diary pages. I'll head over to the Relic Search and Preservation Foundation after a few days to take a look. Perhaps they might have found something." Audrey listened in curiosity. The fool Klein chuckled. "Very good. You can consider your request. In fact, I know that Queen Mystic has already given you the question. I wonder what she's doing in Backlund." Klein's mind started to wander. Soon, Katlia conjured the 3 diary pages and handed it to Mr. Fool. Chapter 766. The deities anchor. Knowing that the diary pages specially selected by Queen Mystic contained rather important information, the fool Klein focused his attention and cast his eyes on the yellowish-brown goatskin in his hand. September 11th. Ever since I became an angel, I've had the feeling that I've had my identity disassociated. In my heart, in my soul, and in the depths of my mind, there's ultimately a voice urging me, influencing me and creating an uncontrollable sense of coldness, bloodthirstiness, cruelty, and craziness. This doesn't stem from the external world or an influence from a god of the same pathway. I can clearly sense that it comes from one's genes, the collective subconsciousness of humanity from generation after generation. It stems from the beyonder characteristic itself, and not from the remnants' psychological influences. It makes me have a strong desire to hunt and kill. It makes me want to devour all the living beings around me with beyonder characteristics. It requires me to spend a lot of effort to resist it. Even if I've already acted and digested the potion, it doesn't seem to improve. It's no wonder that Mr. Dorr said that rationality is temporary, but madness is eternal. September 28th. I haven't written a diary entry in ages. In the past half a month, I seem to see myself being replaced by a stranger. Bit by bit, I turn cold and terrifying. Even my daughter, Bernadette, can only allow me to show her minute amounts of fatherly love. Very, very tiny amounts. Just as I was about to go mad, I seemed to hear countless praises. They were from my subjects, people who had benefited from my reformations. They are the believers who view me as the son of steam. They praise me with great acclaim. They erected statues of me, write stories for me, and have created songs and poems for me. Their voices seem like a ship's anchor that helps me secure myself in place. I began to have the ability to resist that desire and that roar within me. Bit by bit, I walked out of it as I once again possessed the normal feelings of a father, a husband, and a man. Just sequence 2 alone causes such changes. At sequence 0, at the level of a true God, how terrifying would it be to resist that madness? Perhaps they also need an anchor so as to resist the beyonder characteristics and the strong inclination to lose control, the urges buried deep in the collective subconscious. I probably understand what established churches and why they want to spread their faith, to write stories for their faction's saints and leave legends for their corresponding angels. But why do they not have any anthropomorphic form other than symbols? I can't understand it. I'll try asking Mr. Dorr in the future. He seems to know a lot in regards to the domain of deities. It had been released back then. There might very well be an additional deity today. September 29th. After rereading yesterday's diary entry, I recalled the corresponding rituals of my sequence 4, sequence 3, and sequence 2. They clearly had hints of madness and cruelty, akin to the kinds held by antagonists in novels. A sequence pathway might very well be a path destined to be crazy and filled with despair. And this is the only path for humans to obtain extraordinary strength. How laughable and ironic it is. We strive to save ourselves, only to better destroy ourselves? The first page's content left Klein's heart heavy and repressed. The Roselle who had written those words was no longer an ordinary person, but someone who had become an angel, someone who had joined the Twilight Hermit Order, and someone who had seen the blasphemy slate. His understanding of the mysterious world and beyonder characteristics far exceeded him, but he was even more pessimistic than him. He seemed to believe that the world's origins were innately warped, crazy, and destined for destruction. However, the 7 deities have apparently found a way to maintain their rationality. Ordinary humans aren't without any use. Their cognition and their spirituality put together can help a deity anchor their original image, retaining their memories and reason that they had accumulated for years. This can be inferred from Roselle's own experiences. However, why would the 7 deities abandon their anthropomorphic images and use sacred emblems as a form of abstraction? This doesn't match my theories. I can't understand why. Klein didn't waste any time as he flipped to the next diary page. December 5th. Night of the Blood Moon. I conversed with Mr. Dorr. Like every time prior to this, he would always make a request to get me to help him return to the real world, but he doesn't overly insist on it. Furthermore, he would randomly answer some of my questions. Haha, it's like he is playing a game, trying hard to raise my affection towards him. But unfortunately, I'm sorry, I've already sealed off that option ahead of time. As I already knew of the legends of the Kings of Angels, I mainly asked Mr. Dorr about the level of strength that the Kings of Angels have, knowing the fact that I had nothing to lose by asking him that question. Mr. Dorr said that some of the Kings of Angels accommodated the uniqueness, while others had consumed 2 sets of sequence 1 potions. It could also be both. The word accommodate is used in an odd manner. I had asked him about it, but Mr. Dorr didn't directly answer me. All he said was that if one was unable to accommodate the uniqueness, then the uniqueness was a burden instead of an aid to a sequence 1 angel before they held the ritual to advance to sequence 0. It's understandable. It's akin to using a grade 0 sealed artifact. The negative effects are often terrifying, and the uniqueness must definitely be even more exaggerated. I also asked which Kings of Angels had accommodated their uniquenesses, and similarly, Mr. Dorr didn't give a direct answer. He only said that Amon and Adam make all the angels feel a sense of envy, because they were born with a uniqueness and didn't need to consider the problem of accommodation. From another point of view, Does it mean that a Mon and Adam state is equivalent to having consumed a sequence 1 potion and the uniqueness? As expected of the Creator's sons. That Creator, who's also known as the ancient sun god, was actually so powerful that he could pass on a uniqueness to each of his 2 sons, as well as sequence 1 Beyonder's characteristics. Was he trying to purify himself to eliminate any unneeded interference? Then, does Mr. Door also accommodate a uniqueness, and also possibly have even consumed 2 sequence 1 potions? I didn't ask, because I knew he definitely wouldn't answer me. During the conversation, Mr. Door warned me not to directly say out Adam's full name, otherwise, it would be detected and the conversation would be discovered. I had an inkling why as I laughingly asked him that didn't he just say Adam's full name? Mr. Door said it didn't matter. This is because the Apprentice Pathways Sequence 4 is called Secret Sorcerer. It has the meaning of maintaining secrecy, and although it's inferior to the Servant of Concealment, it's enough for him to block any detection at his level. I asked another few questions regarding the deities, but Mr. Door didn't answer. Said was that when I had the ability and opportunity, I could head above the moon to take a look. I would then understand many things. This is somewhat in line with some of my previous thoughts, but I'm suspecting if he is luring me there to get a chance to return to the real world. After all, his appearance each time is related to the moon. As long as Mr. Door appears, there will be plenty of information, usually covering an entire page. His explanation of the level of strength that kings of angels have does match my theories. The generalized meaning of King of Angels implicitly refers to a quasi-deity who exceeds sequence 1 by using a variety of means, but they have yet to reach the level of a sequence 0. This includes accommodating the uniqueness or consuming additional sequence 1 potions. The simplified meaning of King of Angels will point out to the Creator who the City of Silver worships, the 8 kings of all the angels that are ruled by the ancient sun god. Of course, they must also fulfill the general definition. Thoughts rapidly flashed through Klein's mind. As for Roselle's theory about the ancient sun god, he was in strong agreement. He believed that the Creator who the City of Silver worshipped had reclaimed too many authorities of the ancient gods, causing him to show signs of chaos and insanity. Hence, he decisively gave birth to 2 sons to eliminate a portion of the waste. To put it simply, Amon and Adam are freebies that come with drinking potions. From the looks of it, Angel of Imagination, Adam, clearly possesses the uniqueness of the spectator pathway. He is likely the mysterious leader of the Twilight Hermit Order. Since ancient times, he has been interfering with the direction of the times in order to revive his father. I wonder if he has advanced to sequence 0. Even if he hasn't, the number of angels the Twilight Hermit Order can mobilize probably exceeds my imagination. Oh, Secret Sorcerer actually has the meaning of keeping secrets, as well as the implications of concealment. Klein instantly recalled the symbol on the back of the fool's chair. It was the pupilless eye, a symbol representing secrecy, and the contorted lines that represented change. He quickly reined in his thoughts and flipped to the 3rd diary page. November 28th. I dreamed of Grimm again. He was the smartest among my subordinates, but unfortunately, he died in the fog sea due to some unknown infection while exploring that nameless island. He didn't even leave a child behind. Back then, I knew that the nameless island hid secrets with unimaginable danger, but due to my lacking strength, all I could do was hold back. The dream this time is likely a result of my spirituality reminding me that I can explore that island, grasp its secrets, and completely resolve Grimm's matter. November 29th. I summoned 3 subordinates, and with Benjamin Abraham's help and some searching, I finally found that nameless island again. I didn't directly enter, and I decided to rest for a day along its periphery. Edwards said that he also often dreams of Grimm, feeling a deep sense of guilt for not having managed to save him back then. This is not your responsibility, but my problem. That was what I said to Edwards because I'm their leader. November 30th. We ventured deep into the island. Existing here were Beyonder creatures that large sources of data claim that they have gone extinct. They gathered there without any conflict, as though they were consecrating something. This bunch of beyonder creatures without any intelligence appeared to be holding some ritual. They were praying to an unknown deity? In the ritual I saw Grimm. Chapter 767. Passing a message. Grimm, who got infected on the Nameless Island and was undeniably deceased, appeared once again on the Nameless Island. Emperor, when did you start writing horror stories? Also, where's the rest? Klein's gaze froze onto the last line of the third diary page, and he discovered that there wasn't any new information. Apart from that, he was similarly alarmed by Emperor Rosel's description of the beyonder creatures' strange gathering and their worship of an unknown entity. One had to understand that not all beyonder creatures had intelligence and could be communicated with. Many of them were monsters who had lost control or had madness as an innate property. And these monsters that had lost control were gathered together, worshipping some unknown existence. Unfortunately, the Emperor didn't leave behind the coordinates of the Nameless Island. However, even if he had recorded it, I wouldn't dare to head over, for fear of any infection. If I were to die only to be revived on the island, that would be troublesome. I'll need to be at least a sequence 4 or even a sequence 3 before I'll have what it takes to explore it. As Klein thought, he made the diary in his hand vanish. He then turned to look at Katlia and asked with a smile, "What's your request?" Katlia asked without even thinking, "Honorable Mr. Fool, I wish to know if Emperor Rosel once participated in a very secretive and very ancient organization." Very secretive and very ancient. Twilight Hermit Order? Emperor Rosel used to be a member of it? Audrey suddenly recalled Mr. Fool's previous mention of that organization. Alger recalled the corresponding matter and remembered that in Miss Justice's description of the Desire Apostle case in Backlund, there was a mysterious organization mentioned. Back then, Mr. Fool had told the members not to say the organization's name in the outside world, because any mention of it will be known. Such an organization does match Emperor Rosel's status. Alger nodded inwardly. As for Klein, he thought of something else. Queen Mystic's choice of diary pages are vague. She isn't able to accurately and precisely ask questions based on the content. It also means that she roughly knows that diary pages from certain periods are very important with key information within them, or she is able to discern Rosel's emotions from when it was written. As for Ma'am Hermit's question, it didn't pose any problems for Klein. He smiled and said, "Yes." At the same time, he silently warned himself, in the future, I need to be careful that Queen Mystic's questions might be completely unrelated to the diary pages she hands over. Thankfully, I've read quite a number of Rosel's diary, and I have quite a good understanding of the Emperor. After saying that, he added and said with a smile, "It's your turn." He didn't directly mention the Twilight Hermit Order, wishing that he could answer another question based on this topic in the future. Katlia bowed and expressed her gratitude before looking at the magician. "I wish to obtain clues regarding the direct descendants of the Abraham family. 1,000 pounds. She had no psychological burden when it came to offering a price, as Queen Mystic could definitely provide compensation for her. Why did you directly look at me? She already knows that my teacher is a member of the Abraham family?" Furs was first alarmed before realizing that it was nothing surprising. This was because this matter wasn't a secret to the other members of the Tarot Club apart from Ma'am Hermit. It was very normal for them to mention it after completing a transaction with her. Although 1,000 pounds was very attractive, Furs didn't plan on selling information on her teacher. In all her life, there were only a handful of people who had been truly sincere to her. Therefore, she cherished such relationships. After some deliberation, Furs asked, "Why are you looking for them? If you can provide a reason, I can pass the message. As for any further developments, it will depend on them. I have no say on those matters." Indeed, she might appear ordinary, but she actually conceals many secrets. She's a lady who's cautious and meticulous. Katlia sighed inwardly as she said with a nod, "That's very reasonable. I'm searching for the direct descendants of the Abraham family in the hopes of obtaining information on Mr. Dorr. Pass this message to them and see if there's a chance for cooperating. Well, just for passing on the message, I'll pay you 350 pounds. If they're willing to take up the matter, I'll pay another £650. Furs held back for a full second before answering, "Deal." After saying that, she came to realize the hidden meaning behind Ma'am Hermit's words. Mr. Dorr is related to the Abraham family? That's right. My bracelet came from Ma'am Alisa, and it came from the Abraham family? Yes. Teacher still doesn't know that I'm aware he's part of the Abraham family. I can only casually mention it in my letters that someone was searching for the direct descendants of the Abraham family at a particular gathering, and that it has something to do with Mr. Dorr. I wonder what kind of reaction teacher will have. At this point, Miss Justice was happy for her friend, sensing that her friend had escaped the predicament of being broke. Furs is already sequence 7. She is almost caught up to me. I have to become a hypnotist as soon as possible. As she had such thoughts, she glanced at the Tarot Club members, wishing that they had clues to the fruit of an illusory chime tree. Miss Justice's gaze really makes it hard to say no. Furs lowered her head in embarrassment. This was because she had yet to obtain any clues regarding the fruit of an illusory chime tree in her circles. Sitting across from Audrey, Alger thought for 2 seconds and said, "I have clues, but it will take 2 weeks before I can obtain it." He did have clues. A long time ago, he had discovered an illusory chime tree when he entered the primitive island with Kalangos. But due to his lacking strength, he didn't attempt to approach it. And now, he had the chance of advancing to sequence 5. He naturally didn't want to give up any opportunities for making money. After all, he still owed Admiral of Stars for the information of the Obninsks. As for why he was mentioning it now, in a sense, it was to declare his rights. When the time came, he and the world would explore together. It was best to decide the splitting of the spoils ahead of time to prevent any conflict. Of course, when dealing with the illusory chime tree, it was likely that Gehrman Sparrow would idly stand at the side without rendering any assistance. No problem. Audrey was delighted, and she didn't even ask for a price. She was already beginning to consider finding an excuse or a reason to directly buy it from the psychology alchemists after returning to Backlund in June. With the 2 transactions coming to an end, due to none of the other members having any requests for the time being, Katlia repeated her search for the blood of a mythical creature, and Emlyn once again mentioned that he was searching for the remaining 4 believers of the primordial moon. Then, the tarot gathering entered the free exchange segment. Derek very naturally said, "I've already become a notary." "You don't have to tell us that." The hanged man had the urge to facepalm, but he replied with a calm voice. Although a notary will receive a massive boost in one's physical attributes, it's still more of a support role. If the notarization of a power is valid, you'll have them temporarily enhanced. If the notarization is invalid, the beyonder powers will be forcefully dispersed. At the same time, a notary is good at creating contracts. Once a signature is provided as confirmation, even a sequence 5 cannot violate it. Even if a sequence 4 demigod tries to forcefully violate the contract, they will have to pay quite a price. As a member of the Church of Storms, it was one of the basics for him to know the strengths and weaknesses of the Sun pathway. Therefore, Alger carefully explained the exact situation for Little Sunday. He also reminded him to select a mystical item that was good at controlling a target. If there wasn't any, it was best to select something with powerful offensive strength. "Thank you, Mr. Hanged Man," Derek thanked him from the bottom of his heart. Deep down, in the entire Tarot Club, he felt that the greatest and most respectable person was Mr. Fool, and the most impressive person to strive for as a role model was Mr. World. And the most reliable and kind person was none other than wise Mr. Hanged Man. Towards this, Emlyn thought, "This fellow has actually caught up to me. No, I can't be surpassed by him. I need to complete the hunting competition as soon as possible to get the rewards." He contemplated for a few seconds, and after receiving Mr. Fool's permission, he conjured the thin moon puppet that resembled a wooden pole. "Ladies and gentlemen, does any one of you know what this is?" He knew that Mr. Fool was definitely aware of the answer, but he temporarily didn't have anything he could use for an equal exchange with this mighty existence. Therefore, he could only rely on the other members of the Tarot Club for any answers. "Isn't this the puppet I saw at that gathering?" Mr. Moon already found his target. Furs similarly waited for others to give an answer out of curiosity. Katlia carefully observed it before frowning. It's likely a moon envoy. It's a beyonder item that primordial moon believers create by using a bloody ritual that spans centuries. It's said to be imbued with divine powers. Each one of them possesses an unimaginable horror. Where did you obtain it from? It's very dangerous. It's best that you hand it over to the upper echelons of the sanguine. Emlyn changed his sitting posture and chuckled. I encountered it when hunting the primordial moon believer. She's already dead, while I'm still alive. Mr. Moon's flaunting of himself is really obvious. The senior spectator, Audrey, chuckled inwardly. Katlia was taken aback. Without deliberately hiding anything, she asked, How did you do it? Did the upper echelons of the sanguine provide you with assistance? Emlyn gaped, somewhat at a loss for words. Only then did he realize that this topic wasn't suitable for a deeper discussion. Ahem. He cleared his throat and looked towards the end of the long bronze table. I sought help from Mr. Fool. Chapter 768. Conversation between smart people sought help from Mr. Fool? You can do that? Katlia was stunned by what she heard. Having been punished and discovering that his blessed Gehrman Sparrow was becoming more and more impressive, she no longer had any doubts regarding Mr. Fool's status or abilities. She even knew that when Mr. Fool pulled her in through the use of an ancient item, allowing her to escape the pursuit of knowledge, she had come to realize that he was in existence at least at the level of the hidden sage or primordial moon. However, for certain reasons, he wasn't able to interfere with the real world, making her suspect him to be an ancient god that was undergoing an awakening process. The moon's words left her surprised that Mr. Fool was able to provide substantial help to the Tarot Club members, and wasn't just someone who could only provide knowledge or pull them above the gray fog. On the one hand, this means that in times of danger, I can also pray directly to Mr. Fool for help. This is more ridiculous than any ritual. On the other hand, it reveals the fact that Mr. Fool's recovery process is faster than I had imagined. Many thoughts instantly flashed through Katlia's mind. Audrey, Derek, and company weren't that surprised. They had more or less sought Mr. Fool's help in the past, and they had even witnessed the angel under this great existence. Seeing everyone's gaze fall on him, Emlyn shrank his neck as he lifted his chin. I paid a price. It was a fair and equal exchange. Fair and equal exchange. A mighty existence's immediate and effective response is priceless. Katlia couldn't help but retort inwardly. She didn't directly say it, because she too wished to use the opportunity of such a fair and equal exchange in the future. It would imply that she would have an additional life compared to others. Furs was quite puzzled by Mr. Moon's deliberate emphasis on the principle of fair and equal exchange. Everyone who had sought Mr. Fool's help had made a corresponding payment. Mr. Moon sure is a man who cares about his reputation, no, a sanguine. Audrey seriously evaluated Emlyn's emotional changes that happened over a span of seconds. As the exchange continued, the tarot gathering slowly came to an end. After returning to the City of Silver, Derek first recalled a notary's strengths and weaknesses mentioned by Mr. Hanged Man. Then he once again headed for the Twin Towers that was north of the city to select a mystical item. He didn't do this before, because his condition wasn't stable after advancing. He was worried that making contact with a mystical item would lead to him losing control. Inside the spire, Derek Berg listed his requirements after finishing the paperwork. He saw a filtered list of items and obtained the corresponding documents that contained the information. After having a careful read and observation period, he quickly narrowed down the choices to two. The first was Cardi's ring. It was ancient and simple in appearance, and it was completely iron black in color. It was engraved with dark and complicated patterns. It was left behind by a resident of the City of Silver a long time ago. It could aid the wearer in awing a target, causing them to stop. It could also make ordinary humans temporarily lose their reason, or it could awaken the hidden emotions and memories of a crazy monster, allowing them to enter a brief period of confusion in which they wouldn't deliver any attacks. The other item was Thunder God's Roar. It was obtained from a city that was in ruins. It was rather heavy and resembled a sledgehammer. It was dark blue in color while silver lightning swirled around it. Holding its handle felt like holding the leg bone of a creature. It could produce sounds that left the enemy in fear and chaos while in combat, as though a thunder god had descended upon the ground as he kept roaring. Every strike brought with it a potent destructiveness with no lack of terrifying lightning. The negative effect of Carti's ring was that the wearer would unknowingly produce another self. Therefore, one needed to periodically receive treatment from a psyche analyst. If there were any mistreatments, then it could result in the aggravation of the problem, making it harder to treat. And eventually, the two selves would enter a fight, ultimately leading to losing control. In contrast, Thunder God's roar didn't have that many latent risks. It would only make the user be a little irascible bit by bit. As long as one periodically vented their emotions, there wouldn't be a problem. However, it also had another side effect. In a completely dark environment, the chances of being attacked by terrifying monsters from the depths of darkness was 100%. The chances of being attacked is 100%. Upon seeing this number, Derek turned gloomy. This meant that many City of Silver residents had vanished because of this reason. They were the former owners of Thunder God's Roar. Which should I choose? Generating another self is terrifying. Miss Justice has mentioned before that it's called dissociative identity disorder. Thunder God's Roar not only has a power that affects the enemy's state, but it also has a rather powerful offensive capability. My axe of hurricane has been used too many times, so it will likely be damaged ahead of time. I can produce light by myself, so I don't have to be worried about absolute darkness. Derek thought for a moment and pointed at the dark blue sledgehammer. I want Thunder God's Roar. 160 Buckland Street. Klein walked out of his master bedroom and saw butler Walter waiting for him with a few invitation letters in hand. Sir, there are a total of 3 invitations this week. There's an afternoon tea session on Wednesday, a literary salon on Friday, and a banquet on Saturday. They were sent from. Klein listened with a warm expression before saying with a smile, tell these friendly inviters that I'll be participating. All right, sir. Walter bowed and left the 3rd story. Seeing the figure disappear from the stairwell, Klein couldn't help but sigh inwardly. After another week of such invitations, it will be my turn to invite my neighbors for a banquet or a ball. By repeating this act of inviting others and being invited, I'll really enter their circles and would be recommended by them to important figures at even higher levels. I'll be able to enter different clubs. Haha, such recommendations are definitely established on a foundation of having sufficient wealth. A person without any value wouldn't be recommended. Socializing for high society is truly troublesome. It'll take at least another month before I'll get to make contact with people who were slightly involved in the great smog of Backland. The church is easier. As long as there's enough donations and enough piousness, I'll be able to freely enter and exit to listen to the bishop's preachings. Of course, that's on the premise I pass the investigation. If everything goes well, I'll be able to figure out the rotation schedule of the keepers and find a chance to go behind Cheney's gate. Klein reined in his thoughts as he instructed his valet, Richardson, to bring him his coat, hat, and cane. According to his schedule, he was to head to the Royal Grand Theatre to see the most popular play, The Betrayer's Ring, in recent times. This isn't solely for entertainment. It's to understand the popular plays, famous music, and trending novels. Only then could he have a common topic of conversation at the various high society gatherings. Being a popular gentleman must be tiring. Behind a 1-minute performance lies 10 years of hard work. Social gatherings such as these are really exhausting. As Klein lampooned, he allowed Richardson to help him wear a coat before he sat in his high-end 4-wheeled carriage. He headed for the Royal Grand Theatre in Westborough, where he had a luxurious box to himself, and watched The Betrayer's Ring. It's different from television and movies. A play's acting is more exaggerated and impactful. Yes, this is determined by the acting environment. The story isn't bad. But why does it seem familiar? Don't tell me that it's a story adapted from Emperor Roselle's works. These are likely famous play actors. The papers have mentioned them before. It said that they're very popular, just like celebrities on Earth during the age of the internet. As long as I participate in the gatherings of high society, I'll definitely have the opportunity of meeting them. As Klein watched the play, he habitually lampooned inwardly. Cherwood Borough, at the ticket booth of a large theater. Melissa, who finally had her turn, pushed the notes and coins through the booth window and said, "The Betrayer's Ring. 2 tickets. 3 on Sunday." After watching The Betrayer's Ring, Klein sat in his carriage as he sipped a cup of black tea and received the evening papers that Richardson had purchased. He first flipped through the play's critic column, and he found the comments from some professional critics. He compared their reviews to his own, and he gradually formulated a unique and profound experience. Yes, at the very least, it's enough to fool those ladies and gentlemen. After Klein finished his homework, he leisurely read the papers and was surprised to find a piece of news. The Backlund Bike Company's 10% shares have been sold. Further inquiries won't be entertained. It's done? By publishing this piece of news, it means Mr. Isengard has already received the money. Klein was first delighted before he frowned slightly. His gaze landed on the exclamation mark at the end. The information was indeed what he and Isengard Stanton had agreed upon ahead of time, but he found that exclamation mark was rather harsh on the eyes. Such a statement doesn't need an exclamation mark. Mr. Isengard is a person who pays attention to details. He wouldn't give the papers free rein. He deliberately left the exclamation to pass a message? He's giving a warning? While pondering, Klein suddenly realized something. The 10% shares which Isengard Stanton sold are obviously from Sherlock Moriarty. With the former's character, he wouldn't sell it for no reason. In a certain sense, this means that Sherlock Moriarty or his proxy has returned to Backlund. Therefore, one of the factions of the royal family that was involved with the Great Smog of Backlund had acutely noticed this situation and has begun monitoring Detective Isengard Stanton, hoping to capture the person who heads over to claim the cash. How should I get the money? Klein seemed to naturally read the papers as he began seriously considering the pertinent question. Chapter 769. Sacrificing to Oneself 10 at Night. Backlund was drizzling again as a thin fog produced a blurry sense of beauty amidst the street lamps. Isengard Stanton's assistant, Bowen, surveyed the bottom level once before walking to the side of the oriel window and was prepared to shut the final window. At that moment, a shadow scuttled in and landed firmly on the protruding wall. It was a blue, short-furred stray cat. Bowen saw the large pair of yellow eyes looking at him as he couldn't help but chuckle. There's no food here. As a detective's work made him prone to revenge, and him having many secrets to hide, Isengard Stanton's cook and servants were paid by the hour. There were a fixed number of hours a day, and they wouldn't prepare too much food. This made it difficult for there to be any leftovers after dinner. The blue cat opened its mouth but didn't produce any meowing sounds. It began speaking like a human. "I'm Sherlock Moriarty. I'm here to meet Mr. Isengard Stanton." Although Bowen was a Beyonder who was nurtured by the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, he was a low-sequence Beyonder and his horizons were stilted. This was the first time he was encountering a speaking cat, so he was momentarily shocked and dazed. After a few seconds, he came to his senses and recalled what the cat had just said. It said it's Sherlock Moriarty? This great detective really isn't simple. He actually changed into a cat. No, controlled a cat. Such powers are really strange and terrifying. Bowen rapidly calmed down and didn't directly answer the cat. He reached out to close the windows. After doing all of this, he said with a suppressed voice, "Follow me." The cat immediately leaped from the platform behind the oriel window as it agilely followed behind Bowen with its tail up. It followed him all the way to the second story and watched him knock on Isengard Stanton's bedroom door. "Is there something?" Isengard, who was dressed in pajamas with faint lines, opened the door and asked. He was just enjoying his tobacco before sleeping. Bowen cautiously pointed to the crouched blue cat beside him. "Mr. Sherlock Moriarty is looking for you." Isengard, with his white sideburns and thin face, raised his brows slightly and looked down. He took 2 steps back and allowed the blue cat to saunter into his bedroom. "Return to your room and get some sleep. Wake up as per normal tomorrow." We still have a case awaiting us, Isengard instructed Bowen as though nothing had happened. After his assistant left him, he closed the door and turned to look at the blue cat who was sitting beside the reclining chair. He chuckled. I never expected you to have such beyonder powers. I was worried you would directly come over. I noticed your exclamation mark, the cat said with a smile. It had to be said that having such an expression show on a cat's face was rather odd. It left anyone who witnessed it feel a chill run down their back. Isengard didn't react abnormally towards that as he sucked at his pipe, sat on a reclining chair, and slowly exhaled in comfort. He said with a smile, I trust your intelligence. Thank you for your compliments. The cat politely reached out its paws and bowed. Isengard observed it and rubbed its pipe while smiling. You should have understood what is happening. Those people don't dare to monitor me too strictly, afraid that I would discover them and end up telling the Church of Evernight and the Church of Steam. Heh, so even though it will be quite troublesome for them if they get exposed, I believe that they have a demigod among them. This is a deduction and is also based on certain feedback. After all, I've lived on this street for years. Therefore, humans and animals wouldn't be stopped from entering my house. I believe you've already figured that out. But when leaving, you'll definitely be tailed and tracked. Do you have the means to evade their tracking? The sum of money isn't a small one. Bringing it out would be quite conspicuous. Let me think. Were you planning on conferring with me in order to get me to deposit the money into a particular bank account, and then you'll find many people to withdraw them in different parts of Backland? Upon saying that, Isengard said with a self-deprecating smile, this is the best solution I can think of, but carrying it out would be extremely troublesome. The cat didn't give a direct response as it gave a deep chuckle. I only need you to lend me an empty room and 3 candles. No problem. Isengard didn't press the issue as he said, the shares were sold for £12,000. The buyer is the daughter of Earl Hall Audrey. Well, the hiring of lawyers and accountants, as well as the publishing of the advertisements cost a total of £600. In addition, there was a 0.5% stamp duty and 20% D-type taxes. So at the end of the day, there's only £8,940 left. D-type taxes were a tax on commercial, financial, and specialized income. There's tax. More than £2,000 are gone just like that. The cat's expression instantly froze. Klein was formerly a nighthawk and his salary was tax-free. Later, as a private detective, his income was difficult to be monitored, so he never declared his income for tax purposes. Later, he became an adventurer, and since the bounties targeted at pirates enjoyed concessions, there was no need for him to pay taxes on them. Hence, he never realized that tax was something he needed to pay. Therefore, back when Isengard Stanton had mentioned taxes, he hadn't taken it to heart, believing that it wouldn't be much. However, reality had given him a heavy beating. As for why there weren't any taxes for the share transaction the previous time, taxes were waived by the lone government for initial investments related to inventions, as a way to foster inventions. After a brief silence, the cat's whiskers moved as it said, "All right, give me the cash. And move it to the empty room. There's no problems with the money, right? I've already checked them. They wouldn't do any cheap tricks on that, as it would be an insult to my intelligence." Isengard stood up with his pipe. "Remember to send me a signed letter of confirmation by mail later." "It's already on its way," the cat replied, prepared. Isengard walked to the safe inside the master bedroom, using a passcode and key to open it. Then, he took out stacks of cash and he stuffed them into different briefcases. Following that, he left the master bedroom with these briefcases and entered a guest room diagonally opposite the master bedroom. "Check it." Isengard placed the briefcases filled with cash on the ground as he said to the cat that followed him in. "I trust you," the cat said after taking a few glances. Isengard nodded and pointed to the cabinet. "There are candles inside." With that said, he left the door, held the doorknob, and said with a smile, "I'm really curious how you would leave. I believe it will be a very exciting magic show." Isengard Stanton closed the door with a click, leaving the guest room silent and bleak. At the cat's side, a figure dressed in a dark red coat and an old triangular hat appeared. It was none other than Klein's marionette, Wraith Senor. He found the candles and quickly set up a simple altar. Skipping over many of the first few steps, he directly muttered in Elvish, "Blessed of the sea and spirit world, guardian of the Rorstad archipelago, ruler of the undersea creatures, master of tsunamis and storms, the great Calvetua. Your devoted servant prays for your attention. I pray for you to take his offerings. I pray for you to open the gates to your kingdom." The wind inside the wall of spirituality suddenly grew in intensity as Senor quickly sliced the back of his hand and threw out a few drops of blood. As a sequence 5 wraith, everything on him was material that was rich in spirituality. The strong winds sucked up the blood, howling as it drilled into the candle flame that symbolized sea god Calvetua. The flame burgeoned, forming an illusory door filled with magic labels and symbols. After about 10 seconds, the door let out a heavy creak as it slowly opened. One by one, Senor lifted up the briefcases filled with money and threw them into the illusory door. When there was almost none left, the gold coin he stored in his body flew out and landed on the altar. The wraith's figure then disappeared, projecting onto the smooth side of the gold coin. The gold coin trembled as it flew up, hitched a ride on the briefcase ahead of it, and entered the illusory door of sacrifice. Silently, the mysterious door closed as the 3 candlelight were restored to normal. At this moment, the blue, short-furred cat seemed to recover its senses. It looked around blankly as it meowed. After a while, Isengard opened the door and entered, finding all the briefcases with the cash gone. There were only 3 candles burning silently as the blue short-furred cat was warily arching its back at him. While he scrutinized this scene, a rental carriage slowly drove past on the fork on the other end of the street. On the same night, in a building inside Sherwood Borough, Zio returned home under the drizzle. As she wiped her hair with a towel, she said to Furs, "Your letter has been mailed." Furs tersely answered as she began to guess when her teacher would respond. At this moment, Zio put down the towel and quipped, "There's news about Mr. X's gathering. It'll still be at the same place on Friday night." "Great. I can tell Mr. World. I wonder how much I'll need to pay." Furz's eyes lit up when she heard that. Before she could ask about the details, Zio added, "Mr. X also gave a mission that's said to have handsome rewards. It's to inform him of people around them who have abnormal luck." "People with abnormal luck?" Furs muttered in puzzlement. Is this man's brain working? Who would divulge things around them at such a gathering? This will make it easy for others to discover their true identities. Who knows? Perhaps he really is a lunatic. Zio didn't know anyone with abnormal luck, so she answered without much thought. Furs carefully thought for a moment, but she failed to figure out the true intentions behind this mission. All she could do was throw it to the back of her mind. She planned on praying to Mr. Fool once Zio went to take a bath, passing the relevant information to the World Gehrman Sparrow. Chapter 770. A child should act like a child. Mr. X is looking for people with abnormal luck? Above the gray fog, Klein ruminated over the information Miss Magician had provided, in an attempt to analyze anything of use. After thinking to no avail, he decided to approach it from another angle. He first recalled the people who had abnormal luck around him to see if there were any connections. The Fog Sea's strongest hunter Anderson Hood counts as one. Dr. Aaron Series is another. Both of them were affected by one of the snakes of fate. Angel of Fate Ouroboros was one of the creators of Rose Redemption. This secret organization supports and believes the true creator. The Aurora Order is equivalent to the true creator's church. A series of circumstances surfaced in Klein's mind as he quickly came to a conclusion. This is Angel of Fate Ouroboros' attempt to search for Snake of Fate Willoseptin. He is driving the members of the Aurora Order to help him find Snake of Mercury Willoseptin. And this implies that behind Mr. X, there's a king of angels existing somewhere in Backland. Under such circumstances, assassinating Mr. X will be equivalent to having a death wish. It's no wonder Mr. X doesn't care about the uniqueness of Backland. The official factions would at most imagine that he has a saint backing him. In the official dossiers, the Aurora Order only has 5 saints. This way, they will respond in the wrong manner. After Klein made the judgment, the first thought he had was to decline Miss Magician's request, and also to warn her not to provoke Mr. X. If it wasn't because sounding the alarm might affect Snake of Mercury Will-O-Septon, while the Church of the Evernight Goddess clearly had records of Dr. Aaron Sirius's bout of bad luck, Klein would have gotten Miss Magician to report both the Angel of Fate Ouroboros and Mr. X to a particular church. He calmly thought for another few seconds and conjured the World Gehrman Sparrow, making him pray in the gray fog. I'll confirm the situation and give you a reply tomorrow. He didn't directly reject her commission, as he planned on first asking Snake of Mercury Will-O-Septon. He then immediately returned to the real world, and he carefully took out the extremely fragile paper crane from his wallet before gently unfolding it. Klein wasn't in a rush to write anything. Instead, he first recalled the various questions he needed to consult Will on. After thinking up a draft, he got out a pencil and sharpened it with a blade. After stretching his muscles, Klein wrote, "The members of the Aurora Order are searching for people with abnormal luck. I wonder if you know how to use the Worm of Time to create charms. Does your placenta blood count as a mythical creature's blood? If it does, I hope to obtain 1 drop. What price would I have to offer?" Klein had originally planned on asking Will-O-Septon how he was able to maintain his rationality. After all, the Church's information indicated that there had been no public faith in the Snake of Fate. However, he ultimately curbed himself from doing that, afraid that Will-O-Septon in his infant state replied, "How did you conceive the notion that I'm rational?" That way, he had no idea if Will was joking or speaking the truth. Although there's no organization that believes in the Snake of Fate, there are certain areas that believe in the God of Luck. It's considered a traditional custom. Perhaps they are an alternative identity of Will-O-Septon or Ouroboros. Klein mumbled silently and used the best of his clown abilities before managing to refold the paper crane. He then placed it underneath his pillow. After doing all of that, he had the time to calculate how much cash he had. 17,046 pounds, 5 gold coins, 3 soli, and 8 pence in change. If I had assets like a house, manor, and company shares, having so many liquid assets would make me quite a tycoon in Backland. Of course, I'm still very far from being a top tycoon. To reach them, one's overall assets need to be £1 million. As Klein was glad that he had quite a bit of money, he recalled his debt, as well as the large investments that he needed to make in order to develop his persona's image. He then drank a mouthful of water, got into bed, and covered himself with a light but warm blanket before he slowly fell asleep. Amidst his reverie, Klein suddenly snapped awake and saw the desolate black plains. He walked all the way to the pitch-black steeple in the middle of the plains, passing through the chaotic and abnormal layout before coming deep into the steeple. Like before, there was a circle of tarot cards on the ground. However, the protruding area in the middle of the tarot cards didn't have any silvery lines written. Will-O-Septon didn't give a reply. Then why did he pull me into this dream? Amidst Klein's puzzlement, he suddenly saw a black baby pram roll out of the shadows. In it was an infant whose looks were indiscernible while it was wrapped in silver silk. "Mr. Snake of Fate?" Klein politely and cautiously asked. The infant immediately said in a clear voice, "What makes you so sure it's a mister? Isn't that determined from your name? Don't mind such details." Klein lampooned and relaxed due to the attitude he was given. Then, "How may I address you?" Will-O-Septon in baby form tersely answered as it said, stumped. "I haven't decided. As you know, you don't. Every time I start again, I try to make myself a little different, so as to maintain a good mental state. A child should act like a child while they're a child." Klein's heart stirred when he heard that. Is this the way the monster pathway maintains its reasoning so as to resist madness? In the black pram, Will-O-Septon replied briskly, "Yes, every beginning washes away the madness. However, it still needs certain anchoring from faith. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to maintain my state as a sequence one for too long. Heh. Compared to before, you're becoming more and more knowledgeable. Oh, apart from anchoring oneself with faith, there are other ways to resist the madness. However, restarting is clearly an ability of sequence 1 snake of fate of the monster pathway. Other Beyonder pathways aren't able to emulate that. Mr. Azik is constantly losing his memories and repeatedly finding himself. Does it also involve the same concept? Klein nodded in thought as he made every second count by asking, I suspect Ouroboros is searching for you through the Aurora Order members. Will scoffed. I've been playing hide-and-seek with him for a very long time. He isn't good at such matters. It's quite obvious that he doesn't have a childhood. Every time he restarts, he grows up beside the true creator. He lacks the psychological experience of the different stages in life, causing him to be very crazy at times, but of course, he doesn't mind. I did inform Ricardo to use the die of probability in certain places and leave marks. This will mess up Ouroboros' judgment. He will soon leave Backland once again. That means there's still chance of assassinating Mr. X. Yes, when the time comes, I'll divine the level of danger above the gray fog. Klein didn't continue on this topic as he asked, do you know how to use the Worm of Time to create charms? Will didn't directly answer and instead returned with a question, you obtained a Worm of Time from Palaz Zoroast? How did you know? Klein was taken aback as he asked. He wasn't surprised that Will had managed to mention the origins of the Worm of Time. After all, there weren't many demigods in the Marauder pathway who could create avatars, but why hadn't he assumed that it was Blasphemer Amon? The latter could also leave behind a Worm of Time. Will smiled and said, Palaz Zoroast isn't in good condition, and he had to parasitize your former colleague. Alright, your former colleague was investigating Sherlock Moriarty, and he had entered my house in the middle of the night. I sensed that there was something problematic about him and had given him a short period of bad luck, causing him to encounter other demigods hidden in Backland. And when he was in danger, Palaz Zoroast had taken action. It would have been fine even if he hadn't taken action. It's only a prank. I would have given your former colleague sufficient good luck at the critical moment. Leonard is investigating Sherlock Moriarty? The grandpa in his body is called Palaz Zoroast. Klein frowned slightly, unsure where the problem stemmed from. Will continued, the creation of a Worm of Time charm isn't too difficult for you. You can pray to that uniqueness trait about you and use a compound of mercury and pure silver as a medium to draw the corresponding symbols. It's not too difficult. Pray to the Fool? That's right. The mysterious space above the gray fog clearly has a form of attraction to the Marauder pathway. Klein was thrilled as he felt like he had grasped something. At this moment, Will smiled and added, as for what the corresponding symbol is, I've no idea. What a huge reversal! Klein couldn't help but twitch the corner of his lips. When he noticed that Will wasn't speaking any further, he hurriedly smiled and said, there's another question. About your placenta blood. Before he could finish his sentence, Will suddenly opened his mouth and let out a cry. Wah! He began wailing like a real infant. Can't we talk normally? Klein froze in his spot. If he hadn't already confirmed it, he really would have suspected whether the entity before him was a Sequence 1, the president of the Life School of Thought. Alright. I just wanted to ask if it's the blood of a mythical creature, Klein said as he raised his hands midway. Will stopped crying and said with a laugh, of course, but I'll swap it ahead of time. Otherwise, everyone will die on the spot. He paused for a moment before saying, if you can give me something suitable, it's not impossible to give you 1 drop. Alright, goodbye. Just as Will said that, Klein felt the steeple shake as the dream rapidly shattered. Soon he woke up. Chapter 771. Luck Siphon. What item would a snake of fate be interested in? Klein slowly sat up and leaned against a pillow. He thought for some time and decided to consider it at a later date. After all, he was still at least a month away from Will birth. He could also leave the question for the Hermit Catlia and Queen Mystic Bernadette, who was backing her, to rack their brains over. Of course, Klein didn't eliminate the possibility of Will sudden choice of having an early birth. He slowly turned his attention into creating a Worm of Time charm. According to Will explanation, he had most of the conditions required, but he was just short of the corresponding symbol. Pray to the fool and use the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. I wonder if a symbol corresponding to the marauder pathway would work. Even if it does, I don't know what it is. Unless I pull a marauder above the gray fog and let the high-back chair produce the corresponding pattern. As Klein thought about the details, he suddenly had an idea. In that case, perhaps he could try the symbol behind the fool's chair. It was the pupilless eye, a symbol representing secrecy, and the contorted lines that represented change. I wonder if it will work. Divination won't be able to rule it out by elimination, but I can predict if the attempt will be successful. Besides, even if it fails, it shouldn't be too big a problem. After all, I'm praying to myself. Even if the material were to be wasted in the experiment, it would enter above the gray fog and not be lost. With this in mind, Klein felt pumped. He couldn't help but get out of bed to try out the experiment that very night. A material like the worm of time that's left behind by a marauder demigod at Amon's level still has its essence and level even if it's dead. When using it for a charm, it might not reach the level of an angel for various reasons, but it wouldn't be too far off. It'll be about the peak strength of a saint. If Klein succeeded, it would be equivalent to having an additional trump card. At critical points in time, it might give him an additional life. So how could he not be excited and expectant? I can only stir some of the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. The level of the Worm of Time charm will likely drop a little more. But regardless, it will definitely be like the 9th law given to me by Admiral Amirius. If I use the Blatherer's aura to create a high-level charm in the Devil domain, it will likely be at the level of the 9th law. Unfortunately, I wouldn't dare to pray to the dark side of the universe. Klein wore his pajamas as he stood barefooted. He took 4 steps counterclockwise on a thick carpet as he chanted the incantation before entering above the gray fog. Sitting at the fool's seat at the end of the long bronze table, he conjured a dark red fortune teller and yellowish-brown goatskin. He wrote down the corresponding divination statement. The charm I'm about to begin making will be successful. Unwinding the spirit pendulum from his wrist, Klein held it with his left hand and entered the state of cogitation. After repeating the divination statement 7 times, he opened his eyes and saw the topaz spinning counterclockwise at a rather slow speed and ordinary amplitude. This means that it will succeed. But that begs the question, will it successfully verify that the symbol I use is effective, or successfully verify that it doesn't work? As an experienced seer, Klein attempted to interpret the revelation, but he failed to obtain any confirmation. With regards to that, he could only decide to experiment. There was no way for him to eliminate the mistakes if he didn't do so. Right on the heels of that, Klein wrote a new divination statement. The assassination of Mr. X this Friday will be dangerous. This time, the topaz pendant continued spinning clockwise at a faster frequency and greater amplitude. There's significant danger, but it doesn't reach the level of a demigod's participation, much less that of a king of angels. If it involves an existence of that level, he will definitely sense my divination and resist it. From the looks of it, Angel of Fate Ouroboros will soon be led out of Backlund. This means that the danger itself is a result of Mr. X and his subordinates. It's within the limits of what I can handle. As long as I don't make a mistake, the chances of success are pretty high. Klein made a judgment, put down the pen and paper, and returned to the real world. As a mysticism expert who often created charms, he had no lack of common materials. He immediately got out some candles and lit them on the table. Following that, he set up a simple altar against the glow of dusk. He then used a piece of silver to draw out the combined symbol that represented the fool. As Klein didn't know what path number the fool represented or what magic labels there were, he could only ensure that both sides remained equal. According to the books of charms he had read, these would similarly satisfy the rules of mysticism, but the corresponding might would be reduced. The chances of failure would rise because the existence that one was praying to could consider it as being irreverent and not pious enough. Of course, it wasn't a problem for Klein since he wouldn't reject himself. After completing the act of carving the symbol, Klein found a metal bottle and used his spirituality together with a container, and he then poured the mercury out and filled the carved-out pattern. This time, he decided to complete only the front side for now. He would then summon himself and respond to himself. He would then bring the worm with the 12 translucent rings back to the room and then place it on a silver sheet. After doing all of this, Klein adjusted the altar and took 2 steps back. He then said in ancient Hermes, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era." Following the process, he completed the necessary steps before taking 4 steps counterclockwise and entered the space above the gray fog. After imbuing himself with the Black Emperor card, he used his spirituality to stir a tiny amount of the powers above the gray fog to respond to his prayers. While the surging energy poured into the circle of light, Klein didn't hesitate to return to the real world. He saw the altar had turned dark and gloomy, as though there were countless secrets hidden here. And the silver sheet had already floated up, fusing with the worm of time's corpse. Klein took 2 steps forward, flipped the silver sheet around, and he filled the carved symbol on the back with mercury. As the lines lit up, they effused a hazy luster. Klein rapidly retracted his arms and saw the luster grow richer. He then enveloped the silver sheet and the worm of time's corpse inside. Suddenly, the darkness around the altar distorted as the entire space seemed to turn abnormal. This change disappeared as fast as it came. The charms filled with strange patterns slowly landed on the desk. It was entirely translucent in color and was dark black. It was like a miniature card made out of a special crystal. It also resembled the eyes of a particular existence that was watching this world. It succeeded. It really works. Klein was delighted as he hurriedly picked up the charm. He found it cold to the touch as if he was touching snow. Regardless of the resulting effects of the charm, just its formation had meant a success. Klein had once again obtained a high-level charm at the demigod level. He busied himself again, bringing the completed item above the gray fog. He then used dream divination to figure out how to use it. The charm, which was in the shape of a black crystal card, had only one effect, but it was highly potent. It was to siphon off the luck of others. And to be precise, it was to graft fate. A period of the target's fate would be grafted onto the user. The simplest situation would be when an enemy is about to kill me, I'll use this charm, siphoning off his fate of surviving as well as grafting the fate of impending death onto them. Then, the situation would be developed into him clearly succeeding, only for him to die. It does match the Marauder pathway's usual traits, but it's more sinister and terrifying. It's going from stealing wealth to stealing fate. If the worm of time were alive, and I was able to fully employ the power of the mysterious space above the gray fog, this charm might even point towards the domain of time. As Klein thought, he felt a sense of fear. If it wasn't for the assistance that this mysterious space had given him by obstructing and purging things, he had no way to deal with a worm of time. Phew, now it's mine. I can't call it a worm of time anymore. I'll just call it Luck Siphon. Klein once again got busy as he brought back the Luck Siphon charm to the real world. After dealing with the traces of the ritual, he gravely placed the high-level charm into the iron cigar case, putting it together with Azek's copper whistle and the Seigneur gold coin. He then sealed and isolated the case with a wall of spirituality. Being in a good mood, Klein didn't feel sleepy. He drew the curtains a little and allowed the crimson moonlight to shine in, illuminating his room with tranquility and silence. While he was enjoying the scenery, he suddenly saw a figure sneak out from Member of Parliament Mock's house as it approached amidst the shadows. It was none other than Hazel Mock. She once again headed for the sewers, removed the manhole cover, climbed down, and didn't forget to close the cover. Why is she always heading into the sewers? It's not likely for her to be heading to other areas from here to act like a superhero in the mysterious world. After all, each trip doesn't take her more than an hour. Unless she has very reliable intelligence, it's difficult to achieve anything. Besides, this will make it easy for her to be caught by the official Beyonders. Together with the scene provided to me by Erodes, she's likely finding something. It's very easy for her to encounter danger if she keeps heading into the sewers. Klein stood behind the curtain gap as he observed what was happening under the serene night. He didn't attempt to warn Hazel or let the wraith possess her to let her understand the dangers of the Beyonder world. Firstly, this was because he had quite a subjective view that Hazel's sense of superiority was due to a result of her lacking knowledge in mysticism, so he couldn't be sure. Secondly, he wasn't sure how she had obtained beyonder powers and a mystical item. Warning her out of gratitude for her kind deed earlier would easily attract unwanted attention or even trouble. After enjoying an evening of peace, Klein returned to bed and slept till daybreak. Before Richardson entered, he turned into Gairman Sparrow and prayed to the fool, "I can accept the mission, but regardless of the outcome, I want a stone from that bracelet of yours, as well as the ability to use that spellbook of yours for some time. If it succeeds, all spoils of war will be mine. You can only take the target's head. If required, you will need to provide assistance." Chapter 772. Walter's abnormality. He wants a stone from my bracelet and the right to use Lamino's travels for some time? How does he know that I have those two items? I don't remember mentioning it during the tarot gatherings. After hearing Gairman Sparrow's response, Furs was bewildered and rather shocked. It felt like he had seen through all her secrets. She tensed up as she quickly tried recalling how this information could have been leaked. Aside from Teacher, Zio, and Mr. Fool, no one knows that I have these two items, especially Lamino's travels. I haven't even used it? Mr. Fool. Mr. World appears quite strange during the tarot gatherings. He never hands over Emperor Roselle's diary pages, and he doesn't seem to put any effort into this, nor does he show any concern. He and Mr. Fool have a deeper connection. He obtains the relevant information from him, the believer or a blessed. Furs carefully thought over the matter as she grasped something, easing her horror from before. Only at this moment did she have the time and energy to consider if she could accept Gairman Sparrow's requests. To Furs, such a price was too cheap, far lower than she had expected. Furthermore, it was reasonable. As a beyonder who seldom went out and just stayed home writing and resting, lending Lamino's travels for some time didn't affect her safety or her need to use it. And likewise, giving one of the two remaining stones in the bracelet that allowed her to travel through the spirit world didn't cause her to lose all her trump cards. The only problem is that Mr. World seems to be willing to only try it once. If he fails, he will still take the payment. Yes, with the fact that he needs to bear the risk, that's normal. I originally imagined that I would need to help him do many things and obtain a reward from Teacher by using the trader's head to repay the debt. Furs thought calmly for a few seconds before she prayed to Mr. Fool, "Please inform Mr. World that I accept his conditions, and I will try my best to provide him assistance in the operation." He originally wished to warn Gairman Sparrow that using the stone might result in the side effect of receiving the ravings of the full moon, but she then realized that it was apparently only something beyonders from the apprentice pathway encountered. Regardless if it succeeds or fails, I'll obtain that stone. I'll be able to secretly leave Backland and meet with Mr. Hanged Man to explore that primitive island. When the time comes, I'll use the spellbook to record the usage of the stone. That way, I don't have to worry about the return trip. That's unless my luck is terrible and the recording fails. Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief, opened the door, and got Richardson to help him dress up. "Sir, after breakfast, your schedule is to head to the Royal Museum to see the royal family's collection exhibition." As Richardson helped his employer wear his coat, he informed him of the day's schedule. As Dwayne Dantes mastered social dancing very quickly, the number of etiquette classes in the morning went from 5 times a week to 3 times a week, allowing him to spare time for other things. And such exhibitions were definitely a hot topic of conversation in high society circles. By not going in person, it would make him appear lacking. As for heading to St. Samuel Cathedral for the bishop's preachings, Klein had consciously lowered his frequency. This wasn't because he needed to donate tens of pounds each time, but that he was afraid that heading there frequently despite having the novelty period wear off would incur suspicion. Being natural and reasonable were the core traits of his plans. Other than on a Sunday, he planned on randomly heading to church on 2 of the remaining 6 days. He wanted to rely on an even longer period of time to accumulate intelligence so as to figure out a pattern. He couldn't be impatient or in a rush. "I'm already looking forward to it." Klein looked at the dignified reflection of himself as he said to his valet with a smile, Upon thinking of St. Samuel Cathedral and the Church of Evernight, he naturally connected it to Leonard Mitchell's secret investigation of Sherlock Moriarty. He didn't understand what he was suspicious about. Is it because of Emlyn White's purchase of Tinder that drove Leonard to investigate the people related to him, or was it because of the fleeting appearances of the detective in the cases of Capim and Lenevis that made the Red Gloves who are in charge of the investigations notice something? Or could it be both? Klein thought about the clues that he had left behind and had a rough guess. He wasn't afraid that Sherlock Moriarty would be wanted by the Church of Evernight and given a bounty. After all, apart from contacting a few people that he was familiar with, the detective wasn't to appear again. He was worried that someone would discover that Sherlock Moriarty, in his early appearances, resembled Klein Moretti greatly, and as such, they would pursue the deceased former Nighthawk. In fact, it's not a problem even if they discover that. I'm no longer the clown or magician from before. There are more than a handful of demigods searching for me. Even with the high-ranking deacons of the church, there won't be any qualitative changes. Besides, Benson and Melissa truly are ordinary people. The church will definitely not involve them and disturb their lives. I wonder if they will claim the bereavement compensation back. Probably not, for there's no way they can explain it to ordinary people. Klein wasn't that worried with all the debt he was in. This was also why he was so calm when he heard Will Ossepton mention Klein Moretti's identity last night. How could a sequence one angel who was good at fate-related abilities and had previously interacted with Sherlock Moriarty early on not discover the detective's origins? Even with the gray fog's obstruction that interfered with many details, Will Ossepton was definitely able to know that Sherlock Moriarty originally came from Tingen. And back in Tingen, Klein had interacted with a youth named Adamasol, who was of the monster pathway, leading him to bleed from his eyes. And if Will Ossepton were to be aware of this and make a comparison, the answer was obvious. If Leonard were to really realize Sherlock Moriarty's hidden identity, I wonder what kind of expression he would have. Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh as he walked out the master bedroom. He went to the second floor to enjoy the breakfast his cook had prepared specially for him. Westboro, 2 Kings Avenue, Royal Museum. Klein passed through the ticket entrance with butler Walter and valet Richardson and went into the museum. The exhibition was held by the lone royal family. They showcased all kinds of collections that had historical meaning from the kingdom's founding so as to allow the public to enjoy and gain an understanding. It was a way to raise the kingdom's citizens' respect and recognition of the royal family. As a graduate from the Department of History, Klein was still rather interested in the exhibition. Many of the matters that he was very familiar with had the corresponding items appear here. They allowed him to plunge into the long and fascinating history from another angle. What left Klein somewhat puzzled was Walter's deep understanding towards most of the exhibits. He introduced them to Duane Dantes with extreme detail. As expected of a butler who came from an aristocratic household, Klein silently nodded. As he perused the exhibits, the trio kept encountering other visitors, and the exhibition hall was quiet and orderly, so people had to converse in whispers. When passing by an exhibit, Klein noticed Walter suddenly stop. He then glanced to his side as his expression turned complicated. As he wasn't a spectator, Klein wasn't able to interpret the actual meaning of those complicated feelings. All he could do was trace Walter's gaze towards the exhibit. Standing in front of the exhibit were a man and a woman. The man was in his 30s and wore a black suit, silk hat, and a golden-laid cane, looking like a gentleman of status and wealth. The woman was in a yellow dress with a golden necklace. Her overall attire was inclined towards bright colors. Mr. Butler is looking at that man. Klein instantly made the judgment as he swept his gaze past the target without anyone detecting him. He realized that the man looked rather old. His skin was dark as a result of frequent exposure to the sun. The back of his hand was like dried wood, and his fingers were extremely rough. If I didn't look at his attire, I would have believed it if someone told me he was a farmer, gardener, or carriage driver. Klein retracted his gaze as he felt a little puzzled. The reason why he noticed these details was because he had seriously considered the appearance of an ordinary person who adventured in the southern continent for extended periods of time back when he was constructing the identity of Duane Dantes. He believed that apart from his gaze, bearing, and natural facial features that were etched by his rich experience, Dwayne Dantes also needed to have details, such as skin that had experienced long periods of suntanning, unobvious scars, and rough but strong palms. Otherwise, it wouldn't be enough to prop up such a character's inherent traits. I have to say that from the moment I became a faceless, I'm getting more and more experienced and wise in the aspect of creating a new character. If I were to return to Earth, even without my Beyonder powers, I'll have strong acting skills. As Klein made self-deprecating comments inwardly, he saw Walter recover from his stern look as though nothing had happened. As for the man with somewhat old facial features and rough skin, he pointed at a flag inside the exhibition case. This is the flag that the Earl of Lastings, Prince Herod's Augustus, used during the White Rose War. Unfortunately, he perished in that war. However, his death was the turning point of the entire war and the reason why Lone eventually clinched victory. Look, the flag still has his blood. He's quite knowledgeable in the field of history. Klein's gaze swept towards Walter from the corner of his eye, thought for 2 seconds, and smiled. He approached the couple and interjected in a friendly manner, "I never expected such a neglected tidbit of history would be known by someone else. I originally believed that the people's understanding of the White Rose War was only limited to Lone's victory against Intis. Sir, your eruditeness leaves me amazed." To be praised in front of his female partner, the man's expression turned from a wary one to a relaxed one. A gleeful smile appeared on his face. "I'm just a person who likes history." He casually swept his gaze towards the servant of the gentleman in front of him as he suddenly frowned before easing his brows. There were remnant looks of puzzlement. "Indeed, he knows Butler Walter." Klein smiled while maintaining his composure. "Hello there, I'm a merchant from Desi, Dwayne Dantes. How may I address you?" The man hesitated and said, "William Sykes, a land steward at a manor." "You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.